What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Deku story. What if Naruto lost Sakura but her daughter choose him? If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. The office dark except for the one lamp on the desk. Tsunade sat, her head resting in her hand in a frustrated manner as she tried, and failed, to focus on the piles of paperwork that had accumulated on her desk. Her eyes scanned the paper in front of her lazily before she sighed and put down her pen, leaning back in defeat. Normally if something was bothering her, then she would try to fix it. But this time was different. Very different because she was unsure as to what she should. She had so much to consider for this one decision. If she does decide to do it, then the whole thing could backfire on her. He wasn't called a traitor for nothing, after all. He has a pretty bad record and could cause problems. On the other hand, it could be what the village needed. He could someday, if she decided that he could be trusted enough, be a Konoha shinobi again, making the village stronger. And maybe he could even fill in the hole in Naruto and Sakura. Maybe, is the key word. She sighed again and pulled out the file that was bothering her so much. She stared at the file blankly, not daring to open it. She took a deep breath, thinking deeply about the dilemma she was presented with. A knock sounded at the door and she jumped. With her heart racing, she struggled to keep her scare out of her voice when she answered. "Yes, what is it?" A familiar voice sounded from behind the door. "Sensei, it's me. Can I come in?" Tsunade blinked and quickly threw another stack of files on top of file she had been thinking about. After making sure the file was safely out of sight, she spoke. "Yes," she said quickly. Sakura entered with a smile on her face. Tsunade smiled back, it coming out strained as she tried to keep her nervousness off her face. Sakura blinked, knowing that something was wrong with her sensei, but decided against saying anything. If she had learned anything while under her tutorship, it was to mind her own business. With Tsunade, she would talk about it when she was ready, and if you press then she will unleash her wrath upon you. Sakura looked around the dark room and felt a horrible weight on her shoulders. Eyeing the stacked paperwork that needed to be done, she knew her sensei would be spending a lot of time working on it all. She looked down at the folders in her hand and sighed, knowing she was about to dump another day's work on her sensei's desk. She crossed the room in a leisurely manner and placed the pile of paperwork in the corner where the pile wasn't as high. "These are the files on today's patients at the hospital. I'm about to head home, but, if you'd like, I could stay and help you go through all this," she said, gesturing loosely to the mess of papers that hide the top of the desk from view. With a wave of the hand and an overly nonchalant attitude, Tsunade quickly dismissed her student's help. "That won't be necessary," she said quickly, earning an odd look from her student. "Go home and have a nice relaxing bath. Oh, and have at least one glass of sake for me." Sakura eyed her for a moment before shrugging off and bowing with a smile. Wishing her sensei a good night, she received a fake smile and a similar response before she left the room, shutting the door after herself. Once the door closed, Tsunade let out a deep sigh of relief that she alone again. Sitting for a moment to twiddle her thumbs, she pulled open the folder that she had hidden and stared at it, in a complete lose as to what to do. Slowly, she opened the folder and reread the contents for what seemed like the 1,000th time today. No matter how many times she read it, or how much she wished it to change, it was always the same. She just didn't want to deal with it. Well, at least he sent a letter asking for permission. No one doubts that he could have just snuck in and then came to me, creating an even bigger pain for me. And by taking the time to send it, he must be serious. He wouldn't risk of getting caught and all the hell he would get from his sensei if he wasn't serious, Tsunade contemplated. With a deep breath, she reread the letter, as much to reassure herself that she wasn't making this whole thing up than to try and get a better mindset of how she was going to deal with this problem. "Dear 5th Hokage, I know my record is working against me and you would like nothing more than to just pretend this letter never came. However, I just ask that you hear me out. I know what I am about to ask will not please you, but I must ask anyways. I, Sasuke Uchiha, am requesting to come back to Konoha with my nephew, Seto Uchiha. Due to certain circumstances, I have been put in charge of the young boy. We are currently living in the Sound Village under command of the snake, Orochimaru. However, as I'm sure you will understand, I cannot keep him in this village, so close to Orochimaru and his ever-deepening thirst for the Uchiha blood. Let it be known that my brother will have nothing to do with this besides being the father of Seto. I know I do not deserve any sort of kindness from you or another person. However, I do not ask for my own sake. I will take whatever is thrown at me because I deserve every bit of it. Seto, on the other hand, has done nothing but have the misfortune to be born into the dysfunctional and disgraceful Uchiha family. If you will not allow me into the village, which I would understand and not blame for you, then I ask that you at least put Seto with a good family that is equipped to care for an Uchiha child. I am in no position to negotiate, so I will expect anything you will give me. I'm not equipped to care for this child here in the Sound Village. For his sake, I am seeking your help as to get him to a proper environment. Sasuke Uchiha. Tsunade placed the letter down and closed the folder in disgust, suddenly sickened by the wave of guilt and pity she felt for the poor boy. She placed her hand over her eyes and leaned back in her chair, cursing whichever god put this weight on her shoulders. And with an even harsher curse, she decided that she hated the god that was responsible for giving this huge decision to her and hadn't even had the decency to at least give her sake with it. Damn it all, she cursed. He sat by the window, feeling his eyes droop from sleep deprivation. He was stressed, and when he was stressed his mind starts working in hyperdrive, constantly going in such a way as to cause even more stress. This results in his inability to claim some sleep, even though he desperately needed it. Then added to the fact that he had several hours of intense training with his sensei today, was awoken by Seto in the wee hours of the morning and then had to watch the boy for the entire day, it left him feeling as if he would drop to the floor any second. But he couldn't allow this to happen. He had planned it all carefully, and if he fell asleep now, he would surely miss his chance to escape and then the whole thing would be ruined. For both his and Seto's sake, he wouldn't allow that to happen. He glanced at the small figure laying on the bed. The boy's raven hair was sprawled out on the sheets, his hair tangled from tossing around. His eyes were closed and his face was completely calm, an expression of pure innocence that tugged on Sasuke's heartstrings. The blankets were tangled around his limbs, in a way very similar to the way Naruto used to sleep, and his hand loosely clutched his favorite stuffed animal, a snake. Sasuke listened to his light and even breaths, knowing that he had to get him out of this hellhole. It was too dangerous to have him so close to Orochimaru, who every day was eyeing the boy more. The snake had even suggested to Sasuke to let him start training, though he was only 2, soon to be 3. Plus, the Sound Nin weren't exactly angels either. Most were here because they had no other place to go, while others had done some sort of crime and joined Sound to escape prosecution of their own home. While Sasuke and Seto had their own private quarters away from the general population, they still were put in contact with them all more than Sasuke liked. After sitting for an immeasurable time, Sasuke finally stood, deciding that it was time. Most of the base was fast asleep or were in the common area partying or hanging out. Now was the best time to move out. He slung his bag over his shoulder, containing a little food and a few pairs of clothes each. Quietly and carefully, he stepped up towards the bed and adjusted the blanket around the boy before he gently picked him up. As if sensing Sasuke's warmed and protecting presence, the boy automatically cuddled up against the teen's chest, tucking himself into his chest in just the right way. Sasuke made a move to cross the room but stopped when the stuffed snake slipped from the boy's hand. He eyed it for a moment but turned away from it, not wanting to risk waking Seto up while trying to pick it up with his hands full like they were. He mentally promised to buy Seto another one as he reached the door. Opening it and glancing down the hall, he then exited the room and turned to take one last glance at the room he had called his safe haven for the last few months. He took a deep breath, knowing that he was closing a door on a chapter of his life. He exhaled deeply and turned away without a second glance. He was ready for this chapter to end so that a brighter one would open. He was tired of the cold, damp life of the underground. He needed life, he needed light. He needed Seto to be happy. It wasn't long before he was out of the secret base, fleeing to his hometown. He was able to get out without being noticed, but he still traveled quickly in order to try and get as much distance between the Sound and himself. Being extra careful not to jostle the sleeping child in his arms, he ran quickly, jumping through the trees. It was nearly dawn when he reached the village gates. With a sudden burst of energy, he dropped down from the trees and slowly strolled towards a pair of men standing guard at the gate. He ignored their presence and tried to enter, but the two quickly stepped in front of him. He blinked and then tried to go around, but they blocked his path yet again. They had on masks, but Sasuke didn't recognize their chakra. "What is your business here?" the first one asked. He was a rather large man and Sasuke couldn't help but picture him sitting on his opponent to end the fight. Sasuke mentally chuckled at the idea. There was no coming back from that one. Sasuke glanced over at the second one. He was a tall and skinny man. From the looks of it, he could probably be blown away by a strong gust of wind and looked as if he might drop dead if he didn't get some fat on his body instead. The teen also noticed that the man was eyeing the bundle in his arms. Seto was bundled up tightly to protect him from the cool October air. He was hidden from view and it looked as if Sasuke was just carrying some sort of odd bundle. "What's in the bundle?" the second man finally asked after staring for a while. Sasuke, acting on instinct, leaned away in such a way as to hide the bundle from view the best he could and held Seto tighter to his chest. The men exchanged a glance and Sasuke realized his reflex action had made them even more suspicious of him. Sasuke looked straight ahead and sighed, feeling his exhaustion worming its way into every inch of his body yet again. He shifted all of his and Seto's weight to his one side and made a move to dig in his pockets. The guards jumped at his sudden movement and quickly got into fighting stances. Sasuke just eyed them incredulously before he finally dug out a pass Tsunade had given him. Calmly, he held it out to the large man, who hesitantly took it while the skinny man stayed alert and focused on Sasuke's every move, ready to attack at any moment. The large man skimmed over the pass and then waved off his partner, who reluctantly got out of a fighting stance. But instead of letting him just pass, then exchanged a glance and then turned back to the teen. "We will let you pass, but you have to show us what is in the bundle," the first one said. Sasuke blinked and glanced at them. The words, "like hell," came straight to mind, feeling protective of the boy. He chewed on his lip for a moment. "And what if I don't want to show you? What are you going to do?" The men seemed angered by his words, if not slightly insulted by his attitude. Sasuke made a mental note to work on his attitude. People seem to dislike him in general and his attitude doesn't exactly help him. He had been trying to work on it for Seto's sake, not wanting to get the two of them in more trouble than they already have. It's a work in progress. First of all, you will not be allowed to pass and second, you will be leaving here hurt. It would be wise to show us, now, the large man said and Sasuke noted that he seemed to be more talkative than his partner. Sasuke glanced over the men. They didn't look like much, but he didn't want to underestimate them. With that being said, he was confident that he could take them out if it came down to it. But he hoped that it wouldn't come to that, because that would be messy and he really just didn't feel like wasting the limited energy he had left. He sighed and shifted his weight, trying to keep himself moving so he wouldn't collapse. "Look, I'm not in the mood. I'm not afraid of your little threats and I honestly don't feel like dealing with you. Let me pass, I have a meeting with the Hokage that I am currently late for." The men ground their teeth together, seeming insulted again. Sasuke rolled his eyes while secretly feeling proud of himself. Pissed them off after spending less than 10 minutes with them, has to be a new record. "Why you little," the large man started but Sasuke interrupted him, not wanting to let him finish the thought. "I'm not going to tell you again. Move." The large suddenly seemed to reach his limit and stepped forward. Sasuke quickly shifted his weight again so that he could free up his hand. The man grabbed Sasuke's arm and the teen quickly twisted around so that he could get a grip on the man's arm as well. With sudden strength, Sasuke gripped the man's arm tightly, causing the man to let out a yelp of pain and to release his arm. Sasuke tightened his hold on the man's arm slightly to make his point. The man shouted again, and Sasuke glared at the other man with his Sharingan, effectively keeping the man from stepping to help his partner. "You really shouldn't have tested me. I told you to move and you didn't. I'm tired and I'm cranky, and now I'm pissed off," Sasuke growled, but suddenly stopped and released the man and stepped back. The two men eyed him as he adjusted his grip on the bundle, that was now moving. They stepped back too, suddenly afraid of the teen and what might pop out of the mysterious bundle. Sasuke briefly glanced at them before he turned to look at Seto, who popped his head out of his blanket and looked around with his eyes hanging down heavily due to sleepiness. He looked around in confusion, glancing at the two men and then a calm Sasuke. "What's going on, Daddy? Where are we?" he asked, tucking his head against the teen's neck. The two men blinked in confusion, trying to think it over. Apparently, they concluded, the team that had almost just kicked their ass was a father and almost did it while holding his son. They eyed the two, unable to deny the resemblance between the two, though the age of the two of them were kind of scary to think about. Sasuke smiled lightly at the boy and then switched back to a blank face as he turned to the men. "Does this mean I can pass?" he asked, and they nodded dumbly in response. He smirked and then glanced at the man's arm, seeing distinct bruises of each one of his fingers imprinted in the man's skin. "Sorry about your arm. In my defense, you attacked me first," he said, walking slowly past them. "I'm going to tell the Hokage that." "What's a Hokage?" Seto asked while mispronouncing the word, his eyes slowly starting to droop again. Sasuke smirked and secured the blanket around him again. "The Hokage is the leader of the Konoha, the village hidden in the leaf." Seto nodded slowly and closed his eyes again. It wasn't long before soft snores were omitted from the small boy. Sasuke smiled softly and made his way through the familiar streets towards the Hokage tower. Lucky for him, it was still very early and no one was really out yet, and he was able to slip into the Hokage tower without further trouble. He slowly made his way to Tsunade's office, where he knocked softly on the large wooden door. "Come in," sounded from behind in a tired voice, and Sasuke slowly entered. While Sasuke closed the door behind him, Tsunade took the time to study him. He had grown, that was for sure. He had the same raven hair and pale skin, though his face looked worn from lack of sleep. He was taller, leaner, and possibly the most handsome man she had ever seen, and was no longer a little boy anymore. Though only 18, he looked much older and wiser than someone of his own age. She blinked, thinking that he had probably been through more than a person of his own age as well, probably resulting in his wiser and much older appearance. Tsunade stood and Sasuke crossed the room to stand in front of her desk. She held out her hand and he took it without complaint, holding the small boy in a bundle with his other hand. She eyed the boy for a moment, silently noting that he was quite a cute kid, before she turned her attention back to the teen. "Thank you for seeing me," he said, obviously taking great pains to be polite and accommodating to her. She noted this fact and also made note of the great Uchiha pride he was surely wounding by doing this. She nodded and gestured for him to sit. He nodded and did so, making sure that Seto was comfortable before looking up to the woman that decided his fate. She was studying him carefully, and after a moment she took a deep breath and then looked away, choosing to focus on the papers on her desk. "Well, let's not beat around the bush," she started. Sakura exited her bathroom dressed in her colorful undergarments and a pair of matching knee-high socks. With a toothbrush sticking out of her mouth, she walked over to her dresser and grabbed her hairbrush before walking back into her private bathroom. Spitting out the toothpaste, she quickly rinsed out the tool in her mouth before she brushed through her hair, grabbing the blow dryer and starting on her hair. Movement out of the corner of her eyes caught her attention and she turned to see her mother leaning against the doorway. Turning off the blow dryer so that she could hear her mother, she smiled. "Good morning, Mom." "Morning, sweetheart. I just wanted to remind you of a few things before I leave. I left dinner in the fridge and some money in the jar on top of the fridge in case you want to order out tomorrow," she started before Sakura cut her off. "Mom, we've been through this. I'm 17 and I can handle myself for the 3 days. And I have Aunt Kimmy's number in case of emergency," she said, combing through her hair while she stepped towards her mother. The older woman sighed. "I know, but you know how I hate leaving you alone," she said, gently placing her hands on either side of her daughter's face so that she could pull her in to kiss her forehead. "I'm not a little baby anymore. You can trust me to be able to take care of myself without fear of me being alone. What's going to happen when I move out?" She mother gave a fake gasp of pain. "Oh, do not say such a thing. You know I would never allow such a thing," she exclaimed in a teasing manner before kissing her daughter once more. "Okay, I have to get going. The carriage is waiting outside. Goodbye and be careful. Make sure the party you are bound to throw is not too wild," she joked. Sakura smiled and nodded. "Who says I'm having a party?" Her mother shook her head and eyed her like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "You are a teenager. It is customary to throw a wild party when both of your parents are out of town. Now, I am not one to break tradition, so just promise that the party isn't too wild." Sakura snorted at her mother. "Fine, I'll cross the biker gang off the invitation. Happy?" Her mother smiled brightly and nodded. "Yes," she said before giving her daughter yet another kiss. Sakura smiled and hugged her mom before telling her to scat. Her mother rolled her eyes. Fine, I'm going. I'll send your love to the family. Oh, before I forget, put some clothes on. I don't know where you picked up the habit to do your hair before getting dressed. She muttered as she exited the room. Sakura briefly glanced at her underwear-clad body before shrugging and walking back over to the mirror to finish her hair. Her father was out of town on a mission while her mother was leaving to visit her crazy aunt and family for 3 days. Contrary to her mother's teasing, Sakura wasn't going to have a party. She had a work today and then a relaxing weekend to herself all planned out. After finishing getting ready, she ate a quick breakfast her mother had prepared for her before leaving. With her stomach full, she collected her bag and left for the hospital. She was greeted kindly by the receptionist and then she made her way down to her office, where she found the files for her patients waiting. She didn't take long in her office before she started on her rounds. Checking in with her patients, she was happy to realize that today was going to be an easy day. Luckily, no one seemed to be dying or really sick. By the looks of it, she would probably be able to start her relaxing weekend early, probably by noon. Like she had assumed, she was able to leave after only working a few hours. Heading over to the Hokage Tower with a few files in her hand, she hummed happily to herself. While walking, she couldn't help but wonder if her sensei had gotten any sleep or if she had just given up with all that paperwork. She reached Tsunade's office quickly but stopped when she noticed Shizune outside the closed door, seeming to be waiting. As she got closer, she could see the puzzled look on the older woman's face while she stared at the closed door. "Hey, Shizune, what's going on?" The jumped upon hearing her voice but quickly recovered from her scare. She gave Sakura a sweet smile. "Oh, hello Sakura. Are you here to report to Tsunade?" Sakura nodded and glanced at the closed door. "Yeah, there isn't much to report but I thought I would stop by and check up on her. She was working late last night and I just wanted to make sure she didn't overwork herself too much, or worse, get into the sake bottle again," she said, ignoring the fact that her question was unanswered. "Oh, well Tsunade has someone in there right now, but you can wait out here if you would like. I doubt it will be much longer." Sakura nodded and they made their way over to the chairs outside the door. They chatted idly about nothing of importance for a little before Sakura glanced at the still closed door. "So, how's in there?" "Oh, well actually, I don't know. They were already in there when I got in this morning and they wouldn't let me in." Sakura raised an eyebrow. "Really? That's odd. Who do you think it is in there?" Shizune gave another puzzled look before the sound of the door unlocking interrupted their conversation. They stood up and made their way over to the door, which had opened slightly before it stopped. Sakura could hear some muttering from close behind the door but she didn't bother trying to pick out what was being said, not wanting to intrude on someone's business. After a moment, she heard a strong male voice mutter a, "Okay," and a, "Thank you," before the door started to open again. She stepped back to make room for the person about to exit but froze when she caught sight of the male standing in the doorway. He wasn't facing her, instead looking at Tsunade as she stood behind him saying something to him, and he hadn't noticed her yet. She opened her mouth to speak, to say something, to clear her throat and draw their attention, to do something, but found she couldn't. Instead, all she could manage was a small whimper. As soon as it escaped her lips, she mentally cursed herself. But after a moment, she in herself rationalized that, given the current situation, it was understandable. After all, she was still having a hard time accepting the fact that the Sasuke Uchiha was standing in front of her. The sound of a small whimper met Sasuke's ears and he automatically glanced down to Seto. The boy was still sleeping, much to Sasuke's confusion, and the teen wondered if Seto was having a nightmare or something. However, this didn't seem likely because the boy looked completely comfortable, resting peacefully in his arms. Sasuke blinked and then turned to find the source of the noise. Though it took less than a few seconds for Sasuke to locate Sakura standing almost directly behind him, it felt so much longer to Sakura, who was still frozen in shock. It was then Sasuke's turn to freeze. They stared at each other for a long moment, both at a loss as to what to do next. Sasuke finally tore his eyes away from hers and took in her appearance. To say that she was pretty would be an understatement. She had grown, he noted dimly, into a gorgeous woman. She's still a small thing, but naturally taller than she was before, probably a full head shorter than him. Her hair had grown to about shoulder length and she still had the same large, expressive, dazzling emerald eyes. She was wearing a t-shirt, he noticed, and a pair of shorts. She shirt was relatively loose but clung to her in such a way as to let Sasuke know that her figure had changed without really showing off her goods. Sakura, sensing that he was eyeing her, blushed but couldn't bring herself to try and say something. Instead, she looked away in embarrassment and nervousness, hoping for the awkward moment to end quickly. Tsunade decided to step in that moment, seeing that neither had anything to say to each other for one reason or another. Sensing that she should get this moving, she gently placed her hand on Sasuke's shoulder and then cleared her throat, catching everyone's attention. "Well, Sasuke, why don't you head down to the Uchiha compound and get settled in? Do you have any of the necessities, like clothes and food?" He stared at her for a moment, seeming to try to collect himself. He nodded after a long moment. "Yeah, I brought some for the both of us. I have about a day's worth of food and a few days of clothes. I'm going to need to go shopping, but we'll be fine for today." She nodded. "Good. Go home and then you can catch up with friends later," she said, diving him a gently nudge. He nodded and glanced at Sakura quickly before he walked past them, intent on getting home as soon as possible. His arms were going numb from holding Seto for so long and he wanted to get the boy into a proper bed. As soon as he was out of sight, Sakura turned to stare at her sensei in obvious confusion. She thought the encounter over in her head, realizing for the first time that he had said, "we," instead of "I." But in her confused and shocked state, she had failed to notice the sleeping boy in his arms. Instead, she mind immediately jumped to a girl that he had brought home with him. Her sensei eyed her, seeing this devastated look on her face. From the looks of it, Sakura was having a hard time stand as she swayed slightly, and she was clutching her heart. Shizune and Tsunade both grabbed a arm and gently towed her into the older woman's office and sat her down. "Now don't jump to conclusions. I have to explain the situation to you," she began. Sasuke and Tsunade had talked for a pretty good amount of time and the streets were a lot busier now. At first, no one seemed to notice him, but as he got into the denser populated areas, people began stopping what they were doing to stare. Quiet murmurs filled the air around him and Sasuke felt the eyes of every person on him. He was used to stares by now. Even when he was young, people stared and talked, in the sound it was no different. But when he was little, people eyed him like trainwreck, a spectacle. In the sound, people eyed him with a mixture of respect and dislike. Now, they eyed him in hatred and disgust. Sasuke kept his stare straight ahead, not acknowledging the people around him. Holding the sleeping child to his chest, he remained strong and quickly made his way through the crowds to his new home. It was a simple logic, he noticed, it wasn't a good time to be a Uchiha right now. He was severely happy when he entered the Uchiha compound and he was alone again. Going deep into the grounds, he eyed the houses, looking for one that was big and relatively livable. After the massacre, he had moved into an apartment to get away from the compound. But now, he knew it would be better to stay in the compound, as long as he stayed away from the Grande Uchiha Manor. Now it was just a matter of choosing which house to live in. Soon he came across his aunt's and uncle's old home. It was pretty big. If he recalled correctly, it had 5 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, a large kitchen and dining room, a good-sized living room, an office, a storage room, and a nice large backyard to train in with a patio. It was small compared to the Grand Uchiha Manor that he used to live in as a child with his family, but it would do nicely for 2. It was weird entering it after so many years. He remembered clearly entering almost daily through the same doors and rushing to the kitchen, where his aunt always was. His uncle, he remembered, was usually in his office, the backyard, or lounging in the living room. It was odd to be back now and not rush to the kitchen, to not smell the warm, delicious food cooking as soon as he entered, to see the many signs of neglect and abandonment on the interior. It was dirty and covered in dust and cobwebs. The good thing was no one had set foot in the Uchiha compound since his own departure of the place, so the furniture was still present and various household items. Sasuke glanced around, then slowly made his way into the living room where he dusted the couch off quickly and laid Seto down. His arms ached terribly and he stretched them and tried to get blood flow to ease the ache. It didn't work well. And his arms wasn't the only thing aching. With the boy out of his hands, his body protested loudly and demanded some rest. Unfortunately, he ignored this and located the cleaning supplies. He had a lot to do before he could even think about resting. Sakura stared at her sensei as the words slowly sank in. Her mind whirled as she tried to process the fact that anyone had left Sasuke Uchiha, the emotionally constipated prodigy who cared for only himself, in charge of a kid. And from what little Tsunade could tell her, Sasuke seemed to be really attached to the boy. Every thought and belief from recent years rejected this idea. Sakura, as you are aware, Sasuke may need some help caring for this child. It is for this reason that I want you to help him. You, Naruto and Kakashi were the only ones to get close enough to Sasuke and will probably be the only ones to be able to really help him, Tsunade said calmly, staring at her student in an overly businesslike tone that Sakura didn't like. A weird feeling settled in the pit of her stomach, like thing bad was going to happen. But why me? Naruto and Kakashi were way closer to him than I ever was. Why can't they do it? Tsunade eyed her like it was an obvious thing. Are you kidding me? Naruto and Kakashi can barely take care of themselves. It is amazing that the two have survived this long alone, she said, and then suddenly switched her tone to a calmer, more persuasive tone. You are a people person and are great with kids. You are the best for this task. Sakura chewed on her lip. While there was no denying that her sensei is right, it still did not ease the discomfort of having to face him again. She sighed suddenly, cursing herself for being selfish. She has been given the job to help a child in need and she was hesitating because of some awkwardness. Tsunade eyed her. So do you accept? She asked, though Sakura hardly had a choice. She sighed again and looked at her teacher. Yes, she all but whispered. Tsunade smiled wickedly. Good, she said, and then handed the teen a scroll. Give this to Sasuke, it explains the situation, and then you can begin to move your things to the Uchiha compound today. I've arranged everything already. He's expecting someone to move in with him, and I'm sure he will be happy that it's you and not some strange Anbu. The eerie silence filled the room for a moment as Sakura processed what she was just told. Excuse me? She asked after a long moment, unsure she heard her right. I said you can give that scroll to Sasuke and then move in with him, she repeated. Sakura stared blankly at the blonde woman in front of her. You want me to move in with him? Tsunade nodded calmly. Yes. You want me to move in with him? Yes, she repeated. You want me to move in this him? Tsunade narrowed her eyes. Sakura, I will not tell you again. You want me to move in with him? She exclaimed, it finally seeming to sink in. What? I can't. My parents will never allow it. And it's Sasuke we are talking about. I can't live with him. Tsunade rubbed her temples and waited for Sakura's breathing to slow before she tried to persuade her to listen. Sakura, Sasuke is a boy who grew up alone with limited personal contact with people. He now has no choice but to care for a child and there is only so much he can do by himself. You are the best for the job. Sakura interrupted her here. But why do I have to move in with him? Tsunade glared for being interrupted but answered the question nonetheless. Because he is a traitor. Not only is your job to help with the boy, but you are to watch him too, and make sure he doesn't do anything stupid. He seems sincere but I can't risk it. As for your parents, I have sent them a scroll explaining the situation. Since this is considered a mission, they have no say in where you are to live if you accept this mission. Now knowing all of this, are you willing to accept this mission? Sakura was silent for a long moment before sighing. Yes, I accept this mission, she said in a solemn voice. Tsunade smirked, clearly happy that she won. Good. Now there is one more thing you should know. Under no condition are you to tell anyone that the kid isn't Sasuke's. Sasuke wants as little people as possible knowing that Seto is Itachi's son. To everyone of little consequence to the situation, they will only know that Seto is Sasuke's son. Sakura nodded while she stared at the scroll in her hand. Tsunade put a fake smile on her face. You are dismissed. Sakura nodded and slowly exited the room. Going straight to the Uchiha compound, her mind whirled in circles the entire time she walked. One moment she was mentally preparing herself for a relaxing weekend and then the next she has to start thinking about getting boxes for all her crap. It was hard to grasp and she would be lying if she said she wasn't at least a little afraid. Coming across the Uchiha compound, she tried to push the thoughts away so she could focus on trying to locate the house she was going to be living in for God knows how long. She went deep into the compound, having a feeling that he would want to be farthest away from the general population as possible. It wasn't hard to spot the one house with the light on in one of the rooms. She walked over to the door and knocked lightly. With her nerves making her stomach flip the entire time, she waited for a minute before she knocked again a little louder. When no answer came, she took a deep breath and knocked again. Except this time, the door opened and her fist did not make contact with the wood and instead a very toned chest. Realizing that she just knocked on his chest, Sakura opened her mouth to speak but couldn't think of what to say. Blushing deeply, she froze in total mortification. Sasuke blinked, completely unaffected by it. He stepped aside and gestured for her to enter. Stepping inside slowly, Sakura watched as Sasuke disappeared through a doorway of a room to her right. She removed her shoes at the door and pushed them to the side, glancing around her. From what she could see, the house was dark and dirty. The air felt stuffy from being closed off for so long and everything in view was covered in dust. Sakura followed Sasuke into the room, seeing that it was the kitchen and dining room. It had been cleaned, she noticed right away. It was huge, probably smaller than her family's living room, kitchen and dining room combined. Half the room was the kitchen area, consisting of a large counter area that wrapped along the back wall, a refrigerator, stove and oven, and an island. The other half had a large table that looked like it could expand to fit at least 10 comfortably by adding the leaves, which were leaning against the wall on the other side. The room had various cleaning products spread around and the air was much fresher because the windows were open and a breeze was filtering in. "Would you like something to drink? There's water, but that's about it. I haven't gone shopping yet," he said while he rummaged through a small bin with cleaning supplies in it. After a moment he produced a rag and wiped down his hands. "No, I'm fine," Sakura said as she stepped forward and produced the scroll from her bag that was hanging from her shoulder. She held it out to him. "It's from Tsunade." He eyed her quickly, seeing her very businesslike stance, and then threw down the rag on the counter before he gripped the scroll. Sakura waited patiently as he read it over. Though he portrayed no emotions, he inwardly chuckled at the situation. The air was so tense between them that it was almost suffocating, and now he finds out that she is to move in with him to babysit him and Seto. With a deep breath, he closed the scroll and looked to his new roommate. She was now staring past his shoulder in order not to be looking at him. Sensing his stare, she looked up and smiled awkwardly. "So, there you have it." He nodded in agreement. "There you have it," he repeated, while staring at his feet. He looked up and leaned against the island. "When do you plan to move in?" She blinked, not expecting him to be the one to start up the conversation. He stared at his face, seeing that he was trying to make the situation easier. She puffed out her cheeks and blew out her air slowly. I haven't actually thought about it. Well, I guess I could head over to my house now and start packing. I'll return later tonight and bring whatever I have packed." Sasuke nodded, mentally noting that he could clean hers and Seto's rooms next. They would need a place to sleep, so after the kitchen is done, that's his next priority. Then the bathroom. Then, if he had time, his own bedroom. And laundry, he had to do that. Sakura smiled, noting that Sasuke wasn't paying attention to her anymore and was thinking intently about something. She cleared her throat and he snapped his attention back to her. She slowly took a deep back. "Well, I'll see you tonight, then." "Yeah," he said lamely before she flashed him a parting smile and turned and exited the room. Letting herself out, she headed towards her parents' home, forcing herself to focus on the task of packing instead of the handsome raven-haired teen. She made it home quickly, considering that her home was on the opposite side of the village. Opening the door and grabbed the mail from the mailbox by the door. Leafing through them quickly, she closed the door and set her keys and bag down on the table by the door like she usually did. Deciding that the mail was nothing of importance, she tossed the envelopes onto the table as well before moving to the living room. Plopping down, she rested her feet on the coffee table and stared at the ceiling for a long moment, trying to relax for a moment. She sighed and quickly gave up trying to achieve this. Instead, she decided to focus on the fact that she is going to give her parents a heart attack when they return home. Her father is really strict. He says she isn't allowed to date until she is 18 and he must meet the suitor and must approve of him before they can date. And Sakura knows that as soon as her father finds out that she has moved into a man's house, for a mission or not, he's going to assume that she is in a UAL relationship with him. And to make things much worse, her father doesn't like Sasuke to begin with. She let out a frustrated scream before sinking lower into the couch, and covering her face with her hands. Sitting like this for about 20 minutes, she finally sighed and got up, her mind set on the task of packing. Seto's eyes slowly fluttered open. After a moment to adjust, he slowly sat up and looked around. He was on the couch, wrapped up in the blanket in such a way so to keep him from getting dirty. The couch and the furniture around him was all covered in dust and dirt, the air hot and stuffy. He looked around, seeing a light coming from the room across the hall. He stood up slowly and hesitantly made his way over. He had been told many times to stay by Sasuke's side, and now, without him in sight, he was afraid. He leaned against the wall and peeked into the well-lit room. Glancing around quickly, his eyes met Sasuke's form standing by a counter, wiping his hands on a rag. Without stopping to look around farther, he sprinted as fast as his little legs could take him. Sasuke heard the loud footsteps of an untrained child as tossed the rag down quickly. Turned around at the right moment, he caught Seto just in time as the boy tried to scrap her into his arms. Sasuke smirked and hugged the boy tightly. When they released each other from the hug, Seto took the time to look around. With wide eyes, he stared and looked around in wonder at the big and bright room. "Where are we?" Sasuke smiled, watching the childish innocence play across the boy's face. It had been a long time since he had shared the same innocence, and even longer since Itachi had. Looking at Seto now, Sasuke could see the Uchiha resembles. "This is our new home. It's a little dirty right now, but I'll fix that." Seto turned his attention to the teen. "This is our new home," he exclaimed, mispronouncing his words again like he always did. Sasuke smiled and nodded. Setting him down, Seto quickly rushed out of the room and hooked a right. Moments later, he ran by the doorway again, screaming at the tops of his lungs. Sasuke shook his head, knowing that he was going to have to give Seto a bath after he gets done searching through the dirty house. Taking a deep breath, he grabbed the cleaning supply bin and following Seto up the stairs. "Be careful, buddy. I don't want you to get hurt," he called as he climbed the stairs. Moments later he heard giggles. Hours later, she found herself in the room that she previously called her room. Now the room was just a mess of all of her things scattered around. She had tried to organize it all, but wound up getting more disorganized with each item she found. She sighed, looking around at all of her stuff scattered around on the furniture, the floor and trash bags. She never realized she had this much stuff. She grabbed the packing tape and taped up another box filled with the things she was leaving. She pushed the box against the wall, trying to get it out of the way. With a grunt, she stood up and stretched before going down to the kitchen to ease her rumbling stomach. She heated up the dinner her mother had let and leaned against the counter and slowly ate. She couldn't wrap her mind around everything. She was going to move in and have to deal with all the awkwardness and try to deal with Sasuke's mood swings. And have to be away from her safe haven, her family and childhood home. And as she thought about this, she realized that she was scared. Obviously it wasn't a, "Oh my god, I'm going to die," kind of scared, but instead a scared of the unknown type of thing. She finished up the food and walked to the sink to clean her dishes. She had lived a normal life, being smart, but relatively average. She was put on an extraordinary team which led to friendship, strength, and heartbreak. She had grown as a person, becoming the Hokage's student and surpassing her in skill, and was surprisingly happy considering that Sasuke was gone and there was a hole in her team. But now Sasuke is suddenly back in the picture, by his own accord, and with a child no less. She didn't know what to do. She didn't know how to deal with all of this. She didn't know if moving in with Sasuke was going to break her heart even more or if it was going to strengthen a friendship that they never really had. And now that she was thinking of Sasuke, she could help but think about how much he had changed. He still had the same features, but they had changed and matured. He was even hotter than he ever was. He was truly a man now. Sakura finished washing her dishes and dried them. While putting them away, she couldn't help but realize that she was either the luckiest or unluckiest person in the world. Brushing off the thought, she went back up to her room and started up her packing efforts. Almost 2.5 hours later, she stopped and collected her things for overnight. She pulled that bag on her shoulder and then grabbed 2 of the boxes because she couldn't carry anything else. She locked up the house and then walked over to the new Uchiha manor. Walking with her hands full was pretty hard and she almost asked Rock Lee to help her when she saw him down the street. But she decided against it so she wouldn't have to explain the situation. Instead she ducked into a nearby store, ignoring the people that stared at her. Wand waited for him to pass before she left. As she walked, she realized that was she slightly excited. She was scared, but at the same time she couldn't fight the strange urge she felt to go to the Uchiha Manor. She wanted to spend time with Sasuke again. She wanted to meet this Seto that she has heard about but never seen. She was excited and nervous as hell. She finally made it there after the longest time and knocked with great difficulty. She waited for a long moment and then knocked again when there was no answer. She waited in the chilly October air for 10 more minutes before she silently let herself in. She felt awkward, having only entering the place once before and then just walking in on her second visit. And even worse, she felt as if she was disturbing Sasuke's privacy. Putting the boxes down, she couldn't help but wonder if it was always going to feel like she was walking into someone else's house or if she would ever get used to walking in here. She closed the door behind herself and looked around. No one was in sight. The hallway light was on and it seemed to have been swept, but not dusted. Glancing to her right, she saw no one in the kitchen, but the light was on, and glancing to the left, the room was dark and she couldn't see much. It was extremely quiet, and she felt uneasy because of this fact. She leaned against the wall and removed her shoes. Once they were off, she pushed them off out the way and then straightened out her posture. She was unbuttoning her coat when she heard loud footfalls pounding against the wood floor and then a yell. "Mommy!" it shouted. Sakura looked just in time to see a little boy running towards her. For some reason, the boy only had on pajama pants and was running around shirtless. But she was unable to focus on this fact when he was suddenly upon her. He jumped up and grabbed a hold of her coat. Within seconds, he had somehow managed to find a way into Sakura's arms. A shocked and confused Sakura held onto to him, having no clue as to why he had called her mommy. She was so shocked that she barely registered the fact that he was muttering something that she couldn't make out. She also noticed that the boy's hair and parts of his body was wet. She chalked out in confusion, but the boy didn't even seem to notice. Sasuke suddenly came down the stairs. He had one of the rare smiles on his face and quickly faded to a puzzled expression at the sight that greeted him. She noticed that he was carrying a towel and the pajama shirt in his hand and had momentarily frozen spot. Sakura stared at him in a complete loss for words. She didn't even know how to explain how she had wound up in the situation. She stared at Sasuke with wide eyes and holding the boy in her arms. Sasuke was the first to speak. "I see you met Seto." Sakura froze, unable to move or even think. She felt confused, surprised and for some reason, embarrassed. She didn't have much reason to be embarrassed, but, with the way Sasuke was looking at her now, a look she couldn't quite depict but left her feeling sort of breathless, she couldn't help but feel embarrassed by it all. There was just something about Sasuke that could leave her feeling flustered and like she was a little kid in love again. But she brushed the last thought away because she wasn't in love anymore. She was over him. He had hurt her and the rest of Team 7 so much. She had come to terms with the fact that he wasn't coming home and that they were never going to be anything to each other. She accepted this and now was over him. But her inner self couldn't help but butt in. He was back and seemed to be a different person now. Seto moved just then, breaking her from her thoughts. He had moved his head so that he could look up at her and she looked down him, seeing the innocently happy expression fade to a devastatingly pathetic expression of sadness. She felt her stomach drop at the expression on his face and knowing that she had, in a way, caused it. He must have thought she was someone else, she concluded. Sasuke chose this moment to intervene. He crossed the distance between them slowly until he was right in front of her. Sakura blushed a deeper red at how close they were, but Sasuke seemed to be completely ignoring her, instead focusing on the boy. He placed his hand on the boy's back and Seto turned his head to look at Sasuke. Sakura eyed the soft expression on Sasuke's face and watched as Seto let go of her coat and grabbed a hold of Sasuke's shirt. Sasuke reached forward and wrapped his arms around the boy, accidentally brushing against Sakura in the process and making a tingling sensation rush through said girl, and pulled the boy from her arms. Sasuke stepped back and Sakura glanced over the boy, finally getting a good look at him. He looked remarkably similar to the teen. They had the same hair color as well as the same complexion and dark eyes. However, there was something slightly off between them. There were little things that didn't match up between the two and it took a moment for Sakura to remember that Seto wasn't actually Sasuke's son. And while the two brothers looked alike, enough that most would confuse them at first glance and confuse their kids, Sakura could see the features between the two that varied, only small differences. With this new knowledge in forefront of her mind, she began comparing the boy to Itachi. She had seen the older man a few times, enough to know what he looked like and be able to pick out his features from Seto. They had the same eyes shape, they varied from Sasuke, and the same style of hair. Seto's hair hung flat against his head like his father's, long but not long enough to pull into a ponytail, instead of defying gravity like his uncle's. Glancing over him, Sakura could see that he was a little mini version of Itachi. An innocent mini version on him. Sasuke draped the towel over the boy's body and gently began to rub him in a comforting way while drying the boy off. Sakura stared at Sasuke in disbelief. He looked like a father. She had only seen the cold Sasuke, only catching glimpses of the true face that hid behind the mask. But there was no denying that she was really seeing him now. She saw the two of them like a father and son instead of the uncle and nephew they were. She saw the caring nature that Sasuke never publicly displayed. She hadn't known it was possible, but it seems like Sasuke is human after all, able to care about others. Sasuke eyed the boy in his arms. He was carefully avoiding looking at her and his face was growing red. He could tell that he was disappointed, having really thought that Sakura was his mother coming back. Sasuke rubbed circles on the boy's back, knowing that with each moment Seto was getting more upset and a fit was about to ensue. After a moment, Sasuke heard a sniffle and then another. Finally, without shame or embarrassment like only a kid could do, a wave of tears escaped the boy and a loud sob. Sakura pressed her hand to her heart, hating when people cry. It always reminds her of all the tears she has cried, and the many reasons why. Seeing a person cry made bad feelings come up, and then she began to feel worse when she was feeling sorry for herself when others were in pain of some sort. And it was worse to see kids cry. Sasuke pulled the boy closer to him and hugged him tightly. Sakura watched as Sasuke quietly whispered something, probably comforting words, in the boy's ear. Sakura watched for a few awkward minutes before the words seemed to start calming little Seto down. She looked away after a moment, feeling as if she was intruding on a personal moment between the two of them. After what seemed like a millennium, Seto was calm enough that Sasuke turned his attention back to Sakura. She was looking away, so he gently reached out to her. His fingers barely brushed her arm and she jumped. With his hand still lingering on her arm, he pulled it back and pointed to the kitchen before he slowly started forward. She watched him disappear from view and then quickly removed her coat and followed him, leaving her things by the door. Seto was still in Sasuke's arms when she entered. He was standing in front of a nearly empty fridge, looking in and thinking about something. After a moment, he noticed her entrance and gestured to the table. She nodded and made her way over, making herself comfortable and then watching the two. Seto was neatly tucked against Sasuke's chest, resting his head in the crook of the teen's neck. His arms were wrapped around his neck, his right fist clutching the back of Sasuke's shirt, and had a tired expression on his face. After a moment, Sasuke moved away from the fridge and went to the cabinets and produced a cup. He skillfully filled it with water and handed it to the boy using only one hand. From the looks of it, Sakura noticed, he had gotten used to doing things while holding Seto. "Would you like anything to drink?" he asked with his back to her still. She shook her head and then remembered that he couldn't see the gesture. "Oh, no, I'm good for now." There was a moment's pause and he busied himself with washing Seto's cup after the boy finishing drinking from it. The boy rested his head back into the crook of Sasuke's neck, hiding from Sakura's view. After a moment, Sasuke turned and paused, noticing that she was staring. He gave her a questioning glance and she looked away quickly, embarrassed to be caught staring. Sasuke crossed the room and sat across from her, making sure that Seto was comfortable before turning his attention to her. She racked her brain for something to say, anything to ease the awkwardness between them. She put a smile on her face and blurted the first thing that came to mind. "I started packing. I got a lot done, but I was only able to carry 2 boxes over myself. I was hoping to go back and finish the job tomorrow and maybe get some help to move it all over here." Sasuke nodded and at first, wasn't going to say anything but decided to at least contribute a little after seeing an expression of encouragement that she was unknowingly giving him. "Well, I could help you and maybe Naruto too, if he's not busy," he said lamely and awkwardly. She noticed the awkwardness but also noted the great pain he had taken to at least try and contribute. He was trying to get along with her. She could tell that he felt the incompetence of the situation as much as she did, but he was trying instead of just pushing her away. For that, she was grateful. They chatted idly for a few minutes until Sasuke glanced down at Seto to see the child sleeping, tired after his fit. Sasuke glanced at Sakura and then slowly and carefully stood up. "Come, I have to get him to bed and I'll show you your room." Sakura nodded and followed Sasuke as he led her towards the stairs, exactly across from the front door. He pointed out rooms as they passed them. Across from the kitchen was the living room on the left. Going down the wall, there was another door on the left that Sasuke said was an office. Across the office door was a small hallway with a door at the end and another on the left wall of it. Sasuke said it was the bathroom on the left and the laundry and storage room at the end of it. Going up the stairs, Sakura was greeted with two hallways. To her left was a hall that branched off the main hall directly ahead. This hall had a door at the end and a door on the left, very similar to the hall downstairs. Sasuke explained that the left side door was the bathroom she would be using and an extra bedroom. She glanced down the main hall. There was a door right next to the stairs on the right and two other doors even spaced along that side of the wall. On the other side of the hall was only one door, close to corner of other hall. Sakura eyed this all before she watched as Sasuke entered the first door close to the stairs. Sakura stood in the doorway and watched as Sasuke moved around. There was a bed in the corner that Sasuke gently placed the boy on. The room was furnished, looking like a teen used to live in there judging by the old rock and punk posters along the walls. Sakura noticed that things were packed away into boxes, like Sasuke had already been in there, cleaning it out, and it made her wonder who lived there before. Sasuke gently pulled on the pajama shirt before he let the boy really lay down. Sasuke glanced over his shoulder at her. "Can you hand me those clean sheets?" he asked, pointing to a stack on a dresser by the door. Sakura nodded and grabbed them before crossing the room to hand them to him. He nodded a thank you and tucked in Seto, stopping to give him a kiss on the forehead. Sakura smiled at this. Sasuke sat perched on the edge of the bed, staring at the sleeping child. Sakura searched her mind for something to say, anything to lessen the tension between them. Her mind drew a blank and she quickly blurted out the first thing that happened to occur to her. "Why did he call me mommy?" she asked, and then scolded herself for such a stupid question. Sasuke didn't bother looking at her, instead focusing on Seto. His eyes were slightly swollen from crying and it pulled on his heartstrings. He hated when he cried or was upset in any way. Flashback. Sasuke sat perched at the window of the old, creaky home. The rain hit the glass at a steady pace and slowly streaked down the glass, joining with other drops and gaining momentum. He worked to try and keep his mind blank, but was failing. Instead, his mind repeatedly went back to the dream he had of his old team in Konoha and then sadness that followed upon waking up to discover it was a dream. His thoughts were interrupted by a quiet knock on the door and Sasuke glanced at it. No one entered. Everyone knew better and Sasuke looked away, deciding to ignore it. A few moments later, another knock sounded that went ignored. When a third knock followed, Sasuke heaved a sigh and got up, deciding to yell at the person disturbing him. He swung open the door angrily and glared at the man in front of him. It was no one important, he noticed, a low-rank shinobi. "What is so important that you have to disturb me?" The man flinched at his harsh tone, clearly intimidated. I'm sorry to disturb you, but there is someone here to see you." Sasuke was still for a moment and the guy seemed to panic because of his silence. The dark-haired teen let out a huff and pushed past the man, making sure to shove the man with his shoulder, and headed to the front room. He was currently staying in Hideout House for a mission of his. Orochimaru assigned him to be the leader of a certain assignment. The men he was in charge of drove him crazy and he wanted to kill them all just to shut him up, but the mission was almost over, thank God, he reminded himself often. He entered the front room and stood in the doorway. The stupid sound nin that he hated, oh so much, were all crowded in the small room. Standing in the middle of them was a familiar woman that he dreaded seeing. She was smiling at them, loving the attention they were giving her. In truth, she was probably the prettiest woman that they had ever seen and they were all eagerly trying to pick her up. She looked up and smiled sweetly when she spotted him in the doorway. She pushed past the men and they all groaned when they saw who she was walking towards. They knew they didn't stand a chance with Sasuke in the equation. Woman flocked to him. Sasuke examined him. Her hair had grown a bit since the last time he had seen her. Ino reached to the middle of her back, the dark brown color contrasting deeply with her creamy skin. Her gray eyes were framed by expertly done makeup and thick lashes. Though the dark black coat was covering her, Sasuke remembered that she had a very fit and, he will even admit, wide body. The woman smiled and pulled the teen into a hug, much to his dismay. He looked at the men in the room, all staring at him and the mystery woman. He glared and cleared his throat and they all scrambled to leave the two alone. The woman glanced over her shoulder to see they were gone and pouted, having lost a form of entertainment. "Oh, Sasuke, why do you always have to ruin all my fun?" she exclaimed before opening her dark black coat and removing it. Sasuke eyed the revealing top she wore and the short skirt that accompanied the knee-high boots she wore. He sighed. "What do you want, Akina?" She rolled her eyes. "Always straight to the point. No, how are you, or, how's it going?" she said in a mocking tone that earned her a deep glare from the teen. It was her turn to sigh. Fine. I came here because I need someone to, how can I put this? Babysit for me." "Why?" Sasuke deadpanned. She smiled and ran her hand down his chest and he swatted her hand away. "I'm only 16, remember? You're already 20. Hands off me." She pouted for a moment before leaned forward, pressing her hand against his chest again and hovering her lips close to his. "Yeah, but you'll be 17 in 5 months. It's not nearly as bad. Plus, age is only a number." "Not interested," he muttered, gently pushing her away from him. She pursed her lips but he ignored it, trying to get back to business. "Why do you need me to take Seto?" She smiled innocently. "I just got some stuff to do. I need to go out for a bit and then I will be back for him in no time," she said in a tone that tried to sound innocent but Sasuke could see right through it. "He's in the kitchen right now." Sasuke poked his head into the kitchen doorway. Indeed, Seto was in there. Little 14-month-old Seto was sitting on the floor of the dirty kitchen with several sound nin staring at him. No one wanted to touch him, but they were obviously confused as to why a baby was just chilling on their floor. Sasuke knew that if he said that he would watch him, he would be taking full care of the boy. He knew that if Akina was able to get away without him, she was never coming back. Or at least, she wasn't coming back until it served to be convenient to her. Akina was a sorry excuse of a mother and the young teen knew that he couldn't leave Seto with her. It was a wonder that Seto was still alive and unharmed. Sasuke didn't really want to, but he really had no choice. He glanced back at the woman in front of him. She was smiling victoriously, knowing that he cared too much for his brother's son to let her go away with him again. Sasuke scowled at her confident smile and wanted so badly to say no just to wipe that smile off her face. "Fine," he deadpanned and then marched into the kitchen and gentle scooped the child into his arms. Akina smiled and jumped up and down, following him into the kitchen and continued to gloat. "Thank you so much, Sasuke. You're the best," she said and then quickly smashed her lips against his before he could protest. Sasuke didn't kiss her back but he waited until she done before he pulled away. She smiled and kissed his cheek, no doubt leaving a lipstick mark, before pulling on her coat. She walked to the door, thanking him again all the while. Seto reached out his arms for her and let out a whine but she ignored him. "Thanks, Sasuke. I'll be back soon," she lied before disappearing, leaving her child. Seto stared at the door for a moment before he started crying and screaming. Sasuke sighed and adjusted him in his arms so that he was turned around and gently hugged the boy. He glanced around the kitchen, ignoring the stares of the men, and noticed that Akina hadn't left anything for the boy. Sasuke let out a quiet sigh, cursing Akina to the deepest depths of hell for making his life so much more difficult. He turned to the nearest sound nin and grabbed a hold of his shirt. "Go to the store and get things for a 14-month-old. The man looked confused. "I don't know what he will need," he admitted, clearly afraid that Sasuke would get angry. The teen sighed and turned to face one of the few women sound nin in the house with them. She seemed to know more about children than anyone else around and Sasuke remembered her mention something about a little brother back home. She saw his stare and smiled, jumping down from her seat on the counter. "I'll help him, Sasuke," she said flirtatiously, briefly brushing her hand against his arm. Sasuke resisted the urge to pull away from her and nodded to her, almost grateful that she was helping. He turned on his heels and headed back towards his room. "Don't disturb me unless you have the items I requested," he called as he closed the door. End of flashback. Sasuke kept his gaze on Seto. He didn't bother answering her, but he knew the answer. Though Seto was still very young when his mother left him, the boy could still vaguely remember her. And one of the things he remembers was her coat. She wore the same one all the time. The one Sakura wore looked just like it. When he saw Sakura's coat, he must just assumed it was her. Must have been the reason he cried so much. Sasuke stood wordlessly and walked over to the doorway. He paused and Sakura took this as a sign to follow his lead and exited the room quickly. He paused to take one more look inside before closing the door and then leading her down the second hallway. Sakura made note that she would be the closest to the bathroom. Sasuke entered before her and stepped aside so she could enter. She looked around. Like the previous room, it was newly cleaned and had boxes pushed to the side. The walls were a pale cream color with boy band posters lingering on the wall and ceiling. Though it looked like Sasuke cleaned out most of the previous person's belongings, Sakura concluded it was a little girl, probably around the same age Sasuke was when the massacre occurred. I got most of the room clean. The boxes will be taken away tomorrow, and everything else will be cleaned out as well. The bed is clean and that whole dresser is empty. This small table in the closet is the last thing that needs to be cleaned out. I'll do it while you finish packing, he muttered from his position by the door. Sakura nodded. Usually, she would have offered to do it herself, but she just couldn't this time. She couldn't imagine going through the belongings of a little girl, cleaning it all out, knowing in the back of her mind that the little girl was dead. Sakura tried to clear her thoughts. Instead of looking at it as the room of a dead little girl, she looked at it as her new room. She wasn't too pleased with some of the furniture, it seeming really girly, and the fact that it had pink bunnies painted on it didn't help either. She did, however, notice that the room was huge. It was about the size of her old room and about half of the guest bedroom put together. She was pleased with that, since she was always complaining to her mother that her room was too small. We can get new furniture if you don't like these ones. They're kind of. He trailed off and Sakura couldn't help but laugh. It looks like a cute little fairy threw up all over this room. Sasuke nodded. Yeah, you should have seen it before I cleaned it out. This is definitely an improvement, he stated, and Sakura turned to smile at him. One can only imagine. He nodded his head, not knowing what else to do or say. An awkward moment settled over them and Sakura turned to examine the room again. After a moment, Sasuke suggested that he make some tea and Sakura willingly obliged. They headed out the room together and Sasuke stopped to point out his room. It was the only door on the left side of the hall and he explained that it was the master suite. They made their way down into the kitchen. Sakura sat herself at the table while Sasuke made the tea. So, do you want to know what everyone has been up to? She kindly asked. He seemed to hesitate for a moment before nodding slowly. She smiled kindly at him and began talking. There really wasn't anything very substantial to report. She told him about the big crimes or scandals in the village, who was dating who wanted who, what idiotic things someone did, like when Tsunade and Naruto got drunk and ended up waking up half the village by stumbling down the streets singing Christmas songs in July at the top of their lungs. Sasuke didn't say much, just sipped his tea and occasionally threw in a "dobe," idiot, or moron, when he deemed it necessary. But even though Sakura did all the talking, the air was no longer so tense. They were both able to relax and just enjoy the time spent together. Sakura couldn't help but notice that this was the most comfortable she had ever felt around him. And Sasuke seemed pretty relaxed too, even almost laughing a few times instead of his usual chuckle. It was past midnight when they decided that they were done with the tea. Although they had already drank all the tea and hadn't touched their cups for at least an hour, they decided that it was time to go up to bed. Sakura grabbed her bag that was by the door while Sasuke grabbed the two boxes and headed up the stairs together. Sasuke dropped the boxes off and then wished her a good night. She returned the gesture and the boy disappeared into his own room. She stopped into the bathroom and washed her face and brushed her teeth. She pulled her hair into a ponytail and changed into a light blue tank top and light green short shorts. She paused at the bathroom door for a moment, tugging at the mid-drift bearing tank top. She was very thankful that her room was the closest to the bathroom. She drifted to her room and adjusted the sheets on the bed before turning down the lights and climbing into the bed. The bed was comfy, she was surprised to find. She drifted to sleep easily, only to be awoken hours later by someone screaming. She bolted upright in the bed and looked around the dark room. The screaming continued and Sakura quickly jumped out of bed and flung the door open. The hallway was dimly lit, nightlights plugged into the wall outlets that lined the entire hall. With the light, the pinkette could see Sasuke streak into Sito's room and the light flicker on. Moments later, the screaming faded. Sakura went and stood in the doorway. Sasuke was sitting on the edge of the bed, shirtless and in his underwear, while holding little Seto in his arms. Seto was crying, his face contorted in a truly pathetic expression of sadness. His little arms clung to Sasuke as if he was his only lifeline. Mommy. She will. Nightlight, was the only words that Sakura could pick out from the child's mutterings. Sasuke slowly rocked the boy back and forth before pulling the child into his arms and pacing around the room. He glanced over at her and paused, his eyes trailing down her body momentarily. Sakura blushed and pulled at her tank top, trying to cover the exposed skin. Sasuke looked up to meet her gaze and then down at Seto in his arms. He glanced up after a moment and mouthed the words, "Nightmare, you can go back to bed." Sakura nodded and mouthed, "Good night," to him. He nodded, and it seemed like a sort of, "you too," gesture. Sakura walked back to the bedroom, not wanting to invade on a personal moment between the two. She climbed back into bed and tried to go back to sleep. She laid there for a few hours before she sat up with a huff. She grabbed her robe from her bag and quietly crept out of her room, intent on going down to the kitchen. She paused at the base of the stairs when she noticed a small light coming out of Sasuke's room. She slowly crept over to his door, noticing his door was open. She stood in the doorway, looking around the nearly dark room. It was a lot bigger than both Sito's and hers and had a very large bed on the inside. Sakura tried to stifle a laugh when she noticed that the Sasuke Uchiha had a nightlight in his room. She blinked and really examined him. He was laying on his side, his face so peaceful in his sleep. Tucked underneath his arm in a protective manner was Seto, his little fingers gripping the sheets tightly. It was a nice sight and Sakura couldn't help but stand there and admire it for a while. It was amazing to her, and she couldn't seem to wrap her mind around the picture. To her, the name Sasuke was always associated with the raven-haired preteen with a permanent scowl plastered onto his face. But now, she was stared at him, older and more mature looking. He looked like a caring father. She still couldn't believe her eyes. A yawn crept up on her and she frowned. She quietly dragged her feet back into her room and crawled in bed. She drifted back into a peaceful much easier than she suspected. Her eyes slowly fluttered open when she heard noises coming from the somewhere in the house. She sat up lazily and stared at the empty room in a tired manner. She climbed out of bed lazily, but remembered where she was and quickly woke up. She tugged on her robe and crept out into the hallway. When she got to the stairs, she glanced into Sasuke's open room and saw that it was empty. She glanced into Sito's room and noticed it was also empty. She slowly made her way down the stairs and followed the noises to the source, the kitchen. She poked her head into the kitchen and saw the two Uchihas. She saw Sasuke at the stove, his bare back to her. He was dressed in a pair of sweats and nothing else, revealing a number of ugly and painful-looking scars on his arms and torso. Sakura couldn't help but blush at the sight of the toned muscles on his back and arms. Seto was sitting on the counter next to him, watching as the teen prepared the food. Sakura slowly entered and Sasuke must have sensed her presence because he glanced over his shoulder at her. He paused and offered an awkward smirk to her that seemed like a sort of welcoming gesture. He noticed her blush and raised an eyebrow and then shrugged it off. He turned back to the food and stirred something. "Breakfast is almost ready," he announced. She nodded and then sat down at the table. She watched as Seto tugged on Sasuke's arm and wiggled in his position on the counter. Sasuke wordlessly pulled Seto into his arms and then lowered him onto the ground, where the boy quickly went over to the fridge and struggled to open it. Sasuke was grabbing the plates and transferring the food from the stove onto said plates. He paused in the middle of this and crossed the large kitchen to open the fridge for Seto and then returned to the food. Seto pulled out a bag of cherry tomatoes with a struggle and then joined her at the table, struggling to climb onto the chair. Sasuke was right behind him and once he set down the plates in his hands, he lifted the boy into the chair and then was across the room again before grabbing more food and returning. Don't eat all of those. Save your appetite for breakfast, he commanded before taking the cherry tomatoes out of his hand. Daddy, the boy complained. No, Sasuke warned, and Seto pouted, begrudgingly picking up his fork and taking a bite out of his pre-cut food. Sasuke put the tomatoes away and then paused, glancing down at his bare chest. Sakura looked up, waiting for him to sit down. With him facing her now, with nothing blocking her view, she took in the sight. He was very muscled and chiseled, but at the same time lean. He had a perfect six-pack and V-cut. His body was tattered and scared, but for some reason, she could feel her heart beating wildly in her chest, and she felt the urge to run her hands down his entire torso. His sweats were positioned dangerously low on his hips, and Sakura's heart rate sped as her eyes trailed lower and lower, examining the exposed skin. She stopped, staring at the left side of his hip. She saw a dark black mark, not hard to miss on his pale skin. Having worked at the hospital for a while now and, as a result from this, seen a variety of people walking through the doors, she recognized the mark easily. It was a tattoo. She wasn't able to see what it was. Most of it was hidden under the waistband of his sweats, but she was able to see that it was some sort of kanji. Sasuke rubbed his stomach absent-mindedly, drawing her attention. Her eyes moved with his hand, following it for a moment before she took in the whole picture. He was staring at his feet. I guess I'm not used to living with a girl. It's going to take some getting used to, he muttered, and she found it surprisingly hard to concentrate on what he was saying while he was rubbing his perfect abs. He glanced up at her and raised an eyebrow at her flushed face and distracted expression. He cleared his throat and she snapped awake, blushing deeper in embarrassment. He didn't comment on it. I'm just going to get a shirt, he said before disappearing. Sakura stared at the empty doorway, working to slow her beating heart. She couldn't help but scold herself. With a mental sigh, she realized that she wasn't used to living with a very wide boy. It was going to take some getting used to for all of them. When she figured she was in better control of herself, she looked to Seto. He was so small, but was currently sitting in a kiddie chair, so his small form was not hidden from her view by the table. He was staring at her and she offered a small smile, nervous. He looked away quickly, his lip quivering, and her eyes went wide in response, afraid she had done something wrong. Sasuke re-entered the room, then donning a new shirt, and Seto, seeing his father, burst into tears. Sakura jumped and reached out to help him but stopped short, not wanting to upset him more. She looked to Sasuke, to see how he was going to handle this. A mildly concerned expression crossed his face and he gently went to the boy's side. The boy lifted his arms towards the teen, tears streaking down his face, and Sasuke gently pulled the boy into his arms, quietly calming him. He paced the length of the kitchen and it seemed to calm the boy a little. "What's wrong, buddy?" Sasuke asked but got no answer. Sakura blinked and brought her hand up to his lips for a moment. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, drawing Sasuke's attention. "I didn't mean to upset him. I just smiled at him. I didn't think." She trailed off, a worried expression on her face. Sasuke was still for a moment before waving her off. "It's fine. This isn't the first time this has happened," he said, and then gently stroked the boy's back, staring down at him. "He's just really shy," he explained lightly. Sasuke's words sort of calmed her, but she still felt bad for upsetting him. She stared down at her food. "I'm sorry," she whispered again. "Don't worry about it," Sasuke assured before moving over to the table. He gently placed Seto back into his seat, but pulled his chair close to his side before sitting down himself. Sakura was still for a moment, watching as Sasuke added some condiments to his food. He looked up and she blushed and picked up her fork, silently taking a bite. It was good, she noted. It was odd, but she never thought Sasuke as the kind of man to be able to cook. Sure, he wasn't some gourmet chief, but his cooking was really good. She couldn't help but wonder where he learned. He didn't seem like the kind of person to watch the Food Network on TV, but hell, there is a lot she doesn't know about him. Or maybe someone taught him, like a friend or family member. Or, Sakura noted, he could have just taught himself. He's a very independent person. He could have done it. Breakfast was a mostly quiet affair. Sasuke stood up to collect the plates and Sakura stood to help him. They carried the plates to the sink and set them down, and then Sakura smiled awkwardly to the dark-haired teen. "I was thinking about finishing my packing. If I leave now, I can probably finish by, maybe about 3. I could ask Naruto to help us move the boxes, too. Sasuke nodded and turned on the faucet, beginning to do the dishes. Yeah, I can probably finish cleaning out your room by then. I'll be by your house by 3 to help, he said and then paused and looked at her. You still live in the same house as before? Sakura let out a laugh. Yeah, he nodded. Well, okay, we have a plan. She smiled and then explained that she was going to go get dressed and then be leaving. He nodded and she excused herself. She dressed quickly and then headed out the door. Pulling her coat close to her body to fight the cool air, she walked to Naruto's apartment, which thankfully was on the way to her house. She knocked on the door and waited for him to answer. He opened it after a moment and his bright smile spread across his face. He let her in and Sakura entered, glad to be out of the cold, but stood by the door, not wanting to go any farther into the mess he called a home. Have a seat, Naruto offered, gesturing to his garbage-covered couch. Sakura grimaced but then quickly put on a polite smile. No thanks, I'm not staying long. Naruto shrugged. You know, I was just about to stop by your place and see if you wanted to get some ramen with me. My treat, he said with a smile and then rubbed his head sheepishly. Well, actually, we can talk about who pays when we get there. Sakura rolled her eyes. Thanks for the offer, but I have to pack, she said, looking down at her feet and kicking an empty carton of ramen away from her foot. Naruto stared at her in confusion. Pack? Where are you going? Sakura hesitated for a moment. She loved the blonde to death and he was both her and Sasuke's best friend, even if the dark-haired teen would never admit it out loud. But the blonde also has a track record for spreading gossip around the village. And right now, the last thing Sakura needed was rumors about her and Sasuke floating around the village. Sakura, are you ever going to answer me? You can tell me anything, he whispered. He smiled. Look, I'm even whispering now. If you don't want anyone to know, then I won't say a thing. Mom's the word, he said. Sakura rolled her eyes and laughed. The saying is mum's the word, not mom, she corrected. It was Naruto's turn to roll his eyes. Same thing. I mean, they are both ways to say mother. Sakura shook her head. No, mum doesn't refer to mother. It refers to the sound, m. You know, the humming sound you make when you with a closed mouth. Naruto stared at her, tilting his head like a dog would do. Seriously? Seriously. Shakespeare used it in Henry VI, Part 2. Naruto rubbed his blonde, unruly hair. All this time and I have been saying it wrong, he muttered and then shrugged. So, are you going to tell me? Sakura chewed on her lip. Yeah, but you have to promise not to tell anyone. And if you do, I will not hesitate to hit you so hard that, she started but Naruto interrupted her. Okay, I get it. You will most likely kill me. I'm not a fan of dying, so I won't tell. Now, please, just tell me. I'm dying here. Sakura nodded. Okay, but remember your promise. Now, this may come as a shock to you but Sasuke is back and is living in the Uchiha compound. Now, she started but was interrupted again. Naruto jumped off the couch that he was previously seated on and was at her side in a moment. Thankfully, she blocked his path out the door so he wasn't able to run off before she told him everything. What? He's back. What are you doing? Move, I have to go see him. He shouted and Sakura smacked him on the head. He yelped, but she ignored it and then pushed him back onto the couch. Listen, I am going to say this once and only once. If you interrupt me again, I won't tell you and then you will miss something very important that you need to hear about. Is that clear? She demanded, her hands on his hips and leaning over him in a menacing manner. Yeah, I got it, he whispered, clearly knowing that she won't stop at just not telling him. She'll probably also beat the crap out of him. Sakura nodded and then stood up straighter, smoothing out her coat calmly. Okay, as I was saying before I was interrupted. Sasuke is living back at the Uchiha compound and I was instructed, by Tsunade, to move in with him for a while. It's my job to watch over him, because he isn't trusted by the village, and make sure he doesn't try anything funny, which I doubt he will. Also, I will be helping Sasuke with Seto. So, she said before Naruto timidly spoke up. Sakura, he said in a meek whisper. I don't mean to interrupt, but I have no clue who Seto is. Sakura blushed at her stupidity, wondering how she could forget to communicate that vital bit of information. Sakura knew that the only reason Sasuke was even back was because of the little boy. How could she forget that? Sakura blushed and stammered. Oh, yeah, about that. Yeah, how can I put this? Well, I guess I should just tell you. I mean, no sugarcoating the truth, she said, though she knew that she was sort of lying. She had promised Tsunade that she wouldn't tell anyone that Seto was Itachi's kid. She had no right to decide that Naruto got to know the truth, it's Sasuke's decision. But now she couldn't just go ask him, so she was going to have to lie to the blonde. She squared her shoulders. Seto is a little boy, almost 3 years old. He's Sasuke's son and Sasuke has returned in order to make sure that his son grows up in a better environment instead of with a bunch of sound criminals, she said. Silence greeted her and Naruto stared at her like she was on crack. He smiled, seeming to think she was joking for a moment, but the smile faded when he saw how serious she was. His mouth fell open and his eyes widened drastically. What? He choked out after a moment. Sakura didn't stay much longer than that. The rest of her visit was her trying to convince him not to bug Sasuke. Sasuke was busy, she told him, and he didn't need him pestering him and getting in his way. He had a lot to do around the house to make it livable, and Naruto protested that he wouldn't bug him, but Sakura wouldn't have it. In the end, she got him to promise to leave Sasuke alone only after she mentioned that he could see him at 3. She told him that he was going to help her move her stuff into his house and if he helped, he could see him. The blonde readily agreed and Sakura couldn't help but smile, having thought that she was going to have to promise him a lot of ramen to get him to help. She then went home and finished packing. She only packed what was absolutely necessary at first and then moved on to the small things that would help her feel like she was at home there. She finished quickly, and was surprised that her now old room still looked intact. It was emptier than it has ever been, but it still looked like she lived there. She had finished a little earlier than she expected and was about to send a messenger slug to tell Sasuke this when there was a knock on the door. She rushed down the stairs and opened the door, seeing Sasuke and Seto. Sasuke held Seto in his arms, who was toying with the spikes in the back of the teen's head. Sakura smiled at the sight, seeing the adoring look in Seto's eyes as he marveled at his father's hair. Sakura quickly invited them in with a smile. "You're here early," she commented as she closed the door behind them. Sasuke quickly took both of their shoes off and fully entered the house. Sasuke nodded, standing awkwardly in the foyer. She gestured for the kitchen and he followed her in. She went to the fridge while Sasuke set the little boy down and then took in the sight of the house. It was pretty plain looking, nothing grand but had a homey feel to the place. He had never been in before, but he had walked her home more than once in the past. Looking around now, he could almost picture her as a little girl, growing up in this house. "Yeah, I finished early and I figured you might need some help packing," he explained, still looking around. Sakura smiled. "Well, that was thoughtful. I actually just finished packing when you arrived. All the boxes are upstairs. If you wouldn't mind, it would be helpful if you could help me move them downstairs." Sasuke nodded and pulled Seto back into his arms, as the boy was reaching up towards the teen. Sakura smiled at it, noticing that the little boy liked for his dad to carry him. Sakura led them upstairs, quietly noticing that Sasuke examined every inch of the house that he was able to see. She gestured towards her old room and he entered first, walking over towards the bed and looking around the room. She let him examine it, seeing as there was nothing embarrassing in view. She noticed that he stared particularly hard at her wall of photos. She had started it when she was 14. Just a collection of favorite pictures of friends and family. There was a lot of Ino, Naruto, Hinata, Tenten, and Tsunade. Towards the bottom of all the pictures of one of Team 7. It was the only one with Sasuke in it. He stared at that one for a long time. That one and a picture of the new Team 7 with Sai. He seemed to fixate on those two. Sakura stared at his blank face, wishing she could understand what he was thinking. She wanted to ask him but she held her tongue. Instead, she watched, trying to decipher the mystery of Sasuke Uchiha. Seto reached out and touched the picture of the old Team 7. He pointed to Sasuke. "Look, Daddy!" he exclaimed and looked up at his father expectantly. Sasuke put on a fake smile, his face arranged into a careful smile while his eyes remained dark. Sakura studied him, seeing that his first large smile she'd seen in a very long time was a fake one for the sake of his son. "Yup, that's Daddy when he was younger," he said before giving him a kiss on the head. He examined the picture for a moment more before turning away. He kissed Seto's forehead and then set him down on the bed. "Stay here while Daddy and Sakura work," He told the boy and the boy pouted, obviously wanting for his dad to pick him up again. Sasuke grabbed a box and Sakura grabbed another before they moved it down the stairs. They repeated the process several times before Seto got antsy. Sasuke lifted the boy with one arm and tucked one of the lighter boxes under his arm, carrying both down the stairs. He set the box down in the living room and then set Seto down, gently nudging him towards the kitchen. The boy went willingly and Sasuke warned the boy not to get into anything. Sakura smiled and watched as Sasuke disappeared back upstairs to grab the last box. She was about to follow him when a loud, impatient knock sounded on the door. She was greeted with Naruto's impatient face and Hinata. Sakura scowled, seeing that Naruto was trying peer around her. She scolded him for telling Hinata when he promised that he wouldn't tell a soul. She trusted Hinata, but it was the principle of the thing, that he broke his promise. Hinata laughed as she scolded the blonde and the blonde begging to be forgiven so that the pinkette would let him inside. Sakura finally allowed him in and he quickly took off his shoes and looked around. After a moment, he let out a frustrated yell. Teme is not even here yet. Sakura was about to protest but Naruto suddenly whirled around and looked at her intensely. This is crazy. I can't wrap my mind around it. Sasuke with a kid, can you imagine? Sakura smiled and nodded. Looking at Hinata would seem to be in a similar mindset as Naruto. Sakura would admit, even she was still shaky on the subject. It sort of felt like she was going to wake up any moment now and realize it was all a dream. How old is the kid, again? Naruto asked. He'll be 3 in December, she said, remembering that Sasuke had mentioned it the night before while they talked. Naruto was silent for a moment, counting on his fingers. After a moment, his eyes widened drastically. Man, he was 15 when he had him. And you also have to factor in the 9 months so he was, like what, only 14 and having. I just turned 18 and I haven't even had yet. Teme is a whore. Sakura would have laughed at the last part if she hadn't noticed Sasuke coming down the stairs. She saw the slightly annoyed expression on his face and she had no doubt that he heard Naruto's little rant. And with Naruto constantly yelling, she doubted that he could have ever missed it. She just hoped Naruto wasn't loud enough that her neighbors heard like they have been known to do before. Sasuke set down the box and gave Naruto a harsh look, though the blonde didn't notice for he had his back to him. Naruto continued on his rant without knowing that Sasuke was behind him. And who would have thought that Teme would be the first out of the Konoha 12 to have a kid? Sasuke, the emotionless bastard, to actually find a girl he liked. I mean, Sasuke, he started before Sasuke interrupted him. Dobi, who said I had to care about the girl at all. Love isn't always in the same company as lust. Naruto jumped and whipped around to face the dark-haired teen. There was a moment's pause and then Naruto charged him. Sasuke quickly got in a defensive stance and prepared for the blow to come but it never did. Instead, he was tackled in a huge hug. They hit the ground with a large thump and nearly landed on one of the boxes. Instead, Sasuke twisted his body to avoid it, but it caused him to land painfully and awkwardly. "Teme, you're back. I'm so going to beat your dumbass for leaving," the blonde shouted. Sasuke winced because Naruto's mouth was right next to his ear. Sakura couldn't help but feel bad for him. Naruto's yelling hurt her ears and she was across the room from him. She couldn't imagine what it would feel like to have Naruto yelling in her ear like that. "Stop yelling in my ear." Sasuke shouted and struggled against Naruto's hold. "Get off of me." "Oh yeah," Naruto muttered and tried to get up when he was distracted by something out of the corner of his eye. He froze, peering into the kitchen where he could see a little boy staring back at him. He didn't really get a good view of him and he tried to crawl forward so he could, but failed. But, in his sudden distraction, he forgot that Sasuke was underneath him and ended up pushing his hand down on Sasuke's face. Sasuke quickly moved and knocked the blonde out of balance. Naruto collapsed gracelessly on top of the dark-haired teen again and accidentally elbowed him in the stomach. A low and pain-filled grunt escaped the Uchiha's lips and he quickly smacked Naruto in the head, trying to get him off. Naruto yelped and cursed at him, trying to get his bearings. A long argument ensued from that point. The two girls watched them from across the room. Even though they almost smashed her box, she couldn't help but smile. Watching them fight and argue, it reminded her of old times. It was nice and she didn't realize how much she had missed it until now. Hinata leaned over, concerned marring her face. Should we break them up? Sakura waved her hand dismissively. Nah, it's fine. They were always like this, she said, remembering the good old days. Sakura couldn't help but giggle as she watched her two teammates wrestle and argue on the ground. The two teens were currently yelling at one another, hitting the other every chance they got, and cursing loudly, forgetting that there was a little boy present. There was some minor name-calling as well, like when Naruto called Sasuke gay. The funny part of this, Sakura noted, was that Naruto was the one on top of the other teen. If another person came in and witnessed the scene, they would have thought that the kettle was calling the pot black. Naruto was currently laying across Sasuke's chest and had somehow gotten his elbow to dig into the dark-haired teen's stomach. Sasuke, on the other hand, had palm pushing flat against Naruto's neck and chin, pushing his head away from him. Sasuke considered pushing his hand against the blonde's throat, but decided that would be too mean for just wrestling and would save it for later if he needed it. The two continued to struggle and to swear at one another. Sasuke, having run out of things to say, switched effortlessly to another language to swear at him in. Naruto was shocked to say the least. One moment he was listening to Sasuke wide and lewd vocabulary and wondering where he learned all of it, when he suddenly switched to another language. And from that language, came another, and another. Sasuke was soon cursing in several different languages, switching effortlessly between each in such a way that Naruto had no hope to understand. Sakura and Hinata listened as well, blushing as they were able to understand bits and pieces of his rant. Naruto took note of this and he knew what the teen was saying to him was not good. But what really got to him was that he wasn't able to understand it and try to retort to it. The blonde made a mental note to learn another language. Sasuke let out another hateful string of words and Naruto grimaced. Ah, fuck teme. Was that Russian? Sasuke spat something in return, but Naruto couldn't understand it. But judging from the tone, it wasn't good. Just as he was about to retort, a loud cry filled the room and Sasuke's struggles died instantly. Naruto turned to the source of the noise and saw a little cry standing in the kitchen doorway, sobbing frantically. He glanced at the girls to see the shocked and concerned expressions on their faces, and then turned back to the boy. The boy was looking straight at him and when their eyes met, he started to cry harder. Seto had been in the kitchen when he had heard noises followed by yelling. Having grown up in the sound for as long as he could remember, he knew to keep hidden. But curiosity got the better of him and he crept up to the doorway and peeked into the room. What he saw was a strange man on top of his daddy, fighting and hitting him. Panic engulfed him and he started crying and screaming, wishing that his dad would be okay. Sasuke saw Seto crying in the doorway and, after a moment's shock, knew he had to get over there to him. The only problem was Naruto. Without thinking too much about it, he shifted his hand and pushing his hand into the blonde's throat. He gagged and Sasuke used the opportunity to push him off of him. Naruto coughed again and fell in a graceless heap a few feet away, having hit the wall. Sasuke was up in an instant and at his son's side. Sasuke lifted the boy into his arms and Seto wrapped his arms tightly around his neck. Sasuke tried to calm him, and realizing that Seto was upset because of what he witnesses, quickly started assuring him that he was fine and only goofing around. Sasuke sighed mentally, knowing that living in Konoha was going to be a huge adjustment to them. Here, they didn't always need to watch their backs like in Auto. Sasuke glanced over at Naruto to see if he was okay. He had used a little more force than he had planned. Naruto was still laying in a heap, but Hinata was at his side now, asking if he was okay. Naruto stared at her dimly before shaking his head and grinning at her. Yeah, I'm fine. It'll take more than that to take me out, he assured. Sakura slowly made her way over to the two Uchihas. She gently put a hand on Seto's back. With his back to her, he didn't notice that it was her touching him and didn't flinch away. Instead, he felt sort of comforted by it. Is he okay? She asked Sasuke gently, whispering. Sasuke nodded, looking down at the child buried in his chest. He's not used to Konoha. It's going to take some time for him to realize that not everyone here is out to get him. Sakura nodded, but couldn't imagine what it must have been like in the sound. For a 2-year-old to react like this, and be trained to think that someone is always right behind him, it must have been bad. She had no doubt that Sasuke was always there to protect him, but she still couldn't imagine. Naruto made his way over and eyed the child. He was hiding his face in Sasuke's chest, and trying to make himself as small as possible in his father's arms. Naruto was impatient to get a good look at him, but knew he shouldn't push it right now. Instead he looked at Sasuke and Seto as a whole. Teme, I have to say, it still amazes me that you're a dad. I never thought you would be the first. And, man, you even look like a dad. He trailed off, taking a step back to look at the whole picture, a dazed expression on his face. Sasuke raised an eyebrow. I look like a dad? What's that supposed to mean? Am I wearing those ugly dad jeans or something? He said jokingly. Naruto blinked, sort of amazed that he was even joking with him in the first place. It wasn't a Sasuke type of thing to do. He quickly recovered. All I meant is that you look like all those young dads you see on TV. You know, all those guys in those commercials and TV shows. What I'm trying to say is that you look all mature and stuff. Like a real father and not some teen brat. Sasuke blinked and shifted Seto in his arms. Well, that's nice to know, I guess, he muttered, and Naruto glared at him. I'm trying to compliment you, he snapped. Okay, sure, he teased. Sakura eyed the dark-haired teen. He had opened up, she noticed. Having a son had made him lower some of his barriers. If she remembered correctly, he used to act like this when he was younger. Sure, he was more polite and usually didn't involve mocking people, but he was kinder and more open. It was like he was finally showing his inner self, the part of him that he had locked away when his family had died. Sakura ran her eyes down the length of his body. It made her wonder what living with him will be like, and what new things she will learn about him. The whole moving process went well. There was only one minor hitch, and that was that Seto was extra clingy and was constantly wanting Sasuke to hold him. In the end, Sasuke ended up balancing two of the smaller and lighter boxes in one hand and holding Seto's hand with the other. But other than that one minor inconvenience, they were able to move the few boxes Sakura had packed over to the Uchiha Manor. Afterward, the four friends and the little boy went down to the market. They wandered for a few moments before finding a good furniture store. The entire house needed new furniture. While he loved his aunt and uncle, Sasuke couldn't stand their taste. He liked things to be more simple while his aunt preferred things to have a more eclectic feel to it. The store clerk gave them no trouble. He knew Sasuke from way back and, although he didn't approve of his more recent decisions, he was still quite fond of him, seeing him still as the little boy he was. In fact, it was the same guy that helped Sasuke buy his new furniture for his apartment after the massacre and even helped him move it all in, seeing as he was only a small boy then. He was an older gentleman with wrinkled skin, a gray balding head, a pair of large glasses, and a small frame. When he spotted Sasuke, his seafoam green eyes sparkled and a large smile spread across his face. Sasuke, my boy, he called happily. Sasuke put Seto down next to Sakura and went to greet the old man. Surprising everyone, Sasuke bent over and hugged the man. It's good to see you, Naruto. Sasuke greeted back and then stood back up to his natural height. Naruto tilted his head back to stare up at him. Man, you have grown. You used to be so much smaller than me. But look at you now, what are you, 6 foot? Sasuke smirked. I was 6'1" last time I checked. The old man shook his head, chuckling softly to himself. Tall like your father. He was a tall fellow too. He was only a teen when he grew taller than me. You remind me so much of him, he said, releasing a big sigh. And your mother, oh, your mother. She was a small thing compared to your father. He was as tall as you are while your mother was only 5'5". Oh, but she was so beautiful. I see a lot of her in your face, though you seem to be looking more like your father as you grow. And grown you have, he exclaimed while Sasuke smirked softly, a sad light in his eyes. Sakura watched him carefully, taking in the expression and committing it to memory. Naruto removed his glasses to wipe his misty eyes before placing them back on his face. Oh, but you probably didn't come here to reminisce. What can I do for you? Sasuke smirked. I need new furniture for new house. It was my aunt and uncle's old home and their taste in furniture is vastly different from my own. Seto walked over and tugged on Sasuke's pants. The dark-haired teen looked down and lifted the small boy into his arms. Naruto eyed him and Sasuke smiled softly. Naruto, this is my son, Seto. Seto, this is Daddy's very old friend. He was best friends with great-grandfather. Well, hello, little guy. Boy, "You look just like your uncle," he exclaimed, and Sakura's heart sped. She eyed the old man, wondering how he was able to see the differences between the two brothers and Seto so easily. It had taken her a long moment to see it, and that was only with the knowledge that Seto was Itachi's kid in her head. If she hadn't known, he would have thought that Seto looks just like Sasuke instead of Itachi. Sasuke laughed and nodded. "Yeah, he does, doesn't he?" he asked, and then glanced back at Sakura, giving her a knowing look. She smiled back, feeling like she was sharing an inside joke with him. And in a way, she was. Seto hid his face in Sasuke's chest and Naruto laughed. "He's a shy one, like you were. It took a long time for you warm up to me as a young child," he said, laughed, and then smiled at the other three standing behind them. "I'm Naruto." Sakura smiled kindly and offered her hand. "I'm Sakura, and this is Naruto and Hinata. We are Sasuke's friends." Naruto smiled at her and said his hellos to each before really examining her. Sakura blinked while his eyes traveled down the length of her body once before scrutinizing her face. He nudged Sasuke gently. "She is a very pretty one, and I have a good feeling about her. Maybe you two should become more than just friends." Sakura blushed deeply and looked to Sasuke, who rolled his eyes. "You think I should be with every pretty girl you see?" Inner Sakura couldn't help but notice that Sasuke had sort of indirectly called her pretty. "Yeah, but I really like this one," he said with a smile before flashing her a knowing smile and then turning and gesturing for them to follow. "Come, I'll show you the living room sets and we will work our way around from there." For an old man, he was energetic and moved quickly. He showed them many living room sets and Naruto jumped on each, telling them all if it was comfy or not. In the end, Sasuke narrowed it down to 2 sets and, with Sakura's advice which he trusted more than Naruto's, he chose one. It was large couch, a love-seat sofa, an armchair and ottoman. It was all a plush beige color and also included a dark brown coffee table, and 2 smaller tables with matching lamps. From there they went to the kitchen. The only they needed here was a new table and chairs. The old one was nice, so they wanted something similar, but had a younger feel to it instead of the massive, grandmother table they had now. They found a nice plain dark brown one, that could lengthen by adding leaves to it, and matched the living room set perfectly. They also found a few matching stools for the island. From there, they went to the office area. Both Sasuke and Sakura liked books and there was already a good collection at the house, so they bought 2 large bookshelves that would stretch to almost the entire length of the walls. And instead of buying a more modern desk, Sasuke decided on a larger, oak desk. It was the one that Sakura liked best. And it surprised her how much Sasuke was taking her advice. He only bought furniture that they both liked and she felt like she was going to feel much more at home there now after getting all the furniture that she liked and could see herself using. After the office set, they moved over to the bedroom sets. They picked out a set for Seto. He wanted a bunk bed and then proceeded to throw a fit until he got it. Sasuke gave in and allowed him to have a nice, expensive set. The beds was one big large, white piece of furniture. The beds were not directly on top of one another, instead the bottom bed stuck out farther than the top. Next to the bottom bed was a wall of cubby holes where you could store your belongings. And instead of the top bunk having a ladder, it had a staircase that connected to the top bed. This small staircase was a storage area too, each step being a drawer. The beds also included matching white dresser and a nightstand. When Seto was happy, they moved on to looking for remaining furniture sets. Sakura browsed through the rows of bedroom sets. She finally spotted a nice one that she liked. It was a full-sized bed that was low to the ground and a sandy brown color. The headboard and footboard were both low and had a nice little low nightstand next to it with 2 drawers. The dresser part was more of a large closet. It had 4 long doors, the center 2 containing full-length mirrors, that opened up to shelves and little drawers. She liked it, but thought that it was too much. She was about to move on when Sasuke came up to her. "You like this one?" She shook her head but he could see through her. She looked away sheepishly. He eyed the price tag and she bit her lip. He shrugged. "Hey, Naruto, we'll take this set too," he called. Sakura's jaw dropped and she rushed to his side. "No, it's too much. Just get me a plain bed and dresser. I don't need all of this. It's too expensive." He raised an eyebrow. "Don't worry about it. It's really not that much." She stared at him disbelievingly. "You're kidding, right? I've been saving all my money I get at the hospital and I still don't have enough." He smirked. Yeah, well, I have the entire Uchiha fortune. When my clan died, the bank account of every single person with the name Uchiha went to mine. I've donated a lot back to the village, but the third Hokage would only let me give away 15% of it. He said I should wait until I was older and have a family before I decide to give away more. I was only a kid then, he said, and then turned to Naruto. We'll take this set. Naruto blinked at him. Well, since you're on a roll, I could use a new bedroom and living room set. Sasuke raised an eyebrow at him. Yeah, I'll get right on that, he replied sarcastically. Naruto groaned. Oh, come on, Teme. Don't be stingy. Sasuke rolled his eyes and continued browsing through the store. He picked 2 more plain bedroom sets for the guest bedrooms and then was browsing for the master suite. He stopped at one and examined it. It was very simple, but held an elegant feel to it. It was black and contemporary feeling. The bed was a king-sized and low to the ground, but not too low. The headboard was a plain black and cursed slightly at the top, not going too high. There was no footboard, leaving it feeling open in a good way. There was 2 small nightstands on either side, containing 2 drawers each, in the same black color. There was a long dresser with a mirror on top of it and a tall dresser. Sasuke eyed it and then told Naruto he would take that one too. The old man nodded and wrote it down in the notepad he had. Is that all? Sasuke nodded. For now. We'll come back later if we need anything else, he informed the man, and he nodded before going off to prepare the orders. Sasuke shifted Seto in his arms, trying to give his left arm a break after holding the boy for so long. Sakura smiled at him. Thank you for buying me that bedroom set. No problem. Money isn't a problem and I want to make sure you're comfortable, he mumbled, seemed to be feeling awkward still. They would need some time to get used to one another. Naruto came back soon and told him that all the furniture would be delivered in few days. Sasuke and the old man talked for a moment about payment and then said their goodbyes. They exited the store and headed over to the next store, the linen store. Naruto smiled and waved to Naruto as they walked out. I liked him. How exactly do you know him? He was my grandfather's best friend. He grew up with him and watched my father grow up. And then he watched as my father had kids of his own and watched as we grew up. He went to every one of my birthday parties. Hinata smiled. Well, that's very nice. He's sort of like a link to your family, isn't he? Sasuke nodded and then stared straight ahead, opening the door to the linen store, not wanting to talk about family anymore. Everyone caught his mood and dropped the subject. They wandered through the aisles. It wasn't long before Sakura found a bed set that she liked. It had tea and emerald green sheets and a sort of light cream color for the comforter. Included in the set was emerald, tea green, and cream-colored pillowcases and throw pillows with a thick green blanket to fold at the foot of the bed. Sasuke put it in the shopping cart. He found Seto 2 matching bed sets for Seto. The sheets were a medium blue and had a light green and blue comforter and matching pillowcases. Sasuke also found a red bed set and a sort of beige and cream bed set for the 2 guest bedrooms. For himself, he found one that had black sheets and a navy blue comforter. For more color, he matched the black and navy blue pillowcases with some white and gray throw pillows, per Sakura's request. He didn't really care what his bed looked like, but Sakura insisted that it would look nice and that she would help him with it. They grabbed curtains and a few more things to match each room before going home to drop everything off. They then went to one more store, the paint store. They wandered for a while and then started picking out colors for each room. The next few days were a whirlwind of home improvements. Naruto helped Sasuke move all the old furniture out, laughing when he saw the old master bedroom set. The blonde couldn't help but exclaiming that it looked like grandma furniture and almost died laughing when he thought of Sasuke sleeping in there. Sasuke had smacked him pretty hard in order to get him to stop. The teens painted most of the rooms. For Sasuke's room, he chose a bluish-gray color and then a light gray color for his bathroom. Sakura couldn't help but be a little jealous when she entered the master suite. It was the biggest bedroom in the house and she found herself doing cartwheels in there. Also, there was a large walk-in closet that Sasuke was using for storage at the moment and its own bathroom. It had occurred to her that she never saw Sasuke coming out of the other bathroom and she had wondered why until she entered his room and saw he had his own. It was big, too. The back part was the bathtub that was big enough for 2, she tested it out. Hinata had seated themselves in there while the boys moved the furniture, and was enclosed by glass so that it was a shower stall as well. It also had his and her sinks. He only used one sink. Why does he have the cool bedroom? She asked herself. He doesn't have a lot of clothes right now and the walk-in closet is going to waste as it is. And then he only uses that luscious tub for showers. Not to mention the two sinks. It was sort of unfair, she mentally complained. But she knew that he got the master suit because it was his house. But she was still jealous. For her own room, they painted it a sort of light apricot color, and with her new furniture and bed set, it looked really nice. They painted the hallway a beige color, like the living room, and the bathroom a light blue. Sito's room was a sky blue. One guest room was painted a light shade of gray to go with the red bed, while the other was painted a warm, neutral color. Overall, the house looked completely different from when they first moved in, and it felt nice. It felt like their own home instead of just a house. The renovations didn't take long considering all that was done to the house. It took about 2 weeks, and in that time, Sakura started to get more used to living with Sasuke. At first, it was just awkward between them, but he slowly got used to her presence. Soon, he relaxed more around her and they started talking more and slowly getting closer. Her relationship with Seto, however, had not improved much. The first few days, he hid every chance he got. Then slowly he got used to her being around to the point where he didn't hide anymore, but he never so much as uttered a word if he could help it when she was near. It worried her because she was supposed to be helping Sasuke with Seto, but whenever she tried to touch him, he burst into tears. She didn't know what to do. Also, during her time there, she had received several letters from her parents. She had only gotten one from her father, who was still on a mission but had heard the news and sent a letter to tell her how displeased his was by the situation. She knew her father was going to be upset. He's very protective of her. The rest of the letters were from her mother, checking in. She was worried that she was unhappy living with him, especially considering their history. But with each letter she received, Sakura sent one back, assuring her she was fine. It was now the 3rd week in October and all the house improvements were finished for the time being and the house was finally livable. In order to celebrate this fact, Naruto decided it was time to drag Sasuke out to party. Of course, Sasuke denied the offer, but the blonde was persistent. He told the dark-haired teen that Sakura could watch Seto for the night and that he should hang out with the boys. Still the older teen said no, and Naruto then proceeded to literally drag the teen out the door. Sakura stood with Seto by her side, watching their retreating forms. She stared at the door for longer than need before turning to look at Seto. He slowly looked up at her and she forced a smile, afraid that she was going to frighten him again. He stared at her blankly, but he wasn't crying or running away, so she took it as a good sign. "Come on, I'll fix dinner. I'm starving. What about you?" she asked, gesturing towards the kitchen but being careful not to touch him. He didn't reply, but his stomach growled loudly and he blushed, looking away. She smiled and started dinner. She didn't make anything elaborate, but it was good. Seto sat at the table the entire time she cooked, and to fill the silence, she turned on the radio and danced gently to the music. Seto didn't say anything, but she heard a giggle from behind her as she danced, so she guessed he found her amusing. Sakura gathered the plates in her hands, and stared down at the bowl of noodles. She eyed Seto and then asked if he could carry the bowl over to the table. He nodded and made his way over, and she gently handed it to him. She walked ahead of him and set the plates down onto the table. She turned to grab the bowl and then mentally smacked herself. It was a nice idea in theory to have him help her. It saved her a trip and she didn't have to worry about juggling plates. But what she didn't factor into the theory was that he was a small boy and it was a heavy bowl, especially when it was full like it was. Just as she realized this, the bowl slipped from Sito's small grip and started falling to the ground. In that moment, she didn't care about the stupid noodles. All she cared about was that the heavy bowl was about to fall on his little toes. Acting on instinct, she ran and kicked the bowl up into the air, saving his little toes. He stared at her in wonder. And then the noodles fell. One moment, they were staring at one another, the next they were covered in noodles, frozen in shock. Sakura blinked and then shook a big clump of noodles off her hand. Unfortunately, it went straight down onto Sito's face. Seto let out a yelp and then froze, staring at her in disbelief. They were both still for a long moment before Seto plucked a handful of noodles off his face and back at Sakura. Some hit her in the face but most hit his throat and then slid into her shirt. She gasped as the cold noodles slid into her bra and she squirmed. She looked at Seto and narrowed her eyes. She knew he never meant to get it in her shirt but she still had to make him. She scooped a handful of noodles off the ground and threw it back at him, laughing as he yelped and stared at her in disbelief. But her laughing at him made him pick up his own handful and throw it at her. From the moment it hit her, it was a full-on food fight. They grabbed any food in sight. The noodles, the food on the plates, and off the counter. They found themselves laughing and having fun, enjoying the feeling of being able to let loose and make a mess. And Sakura knew by the look on his smiling face that they were forming a bond. But in that moment, the bond didn't matter. All that mattered was that they were having fun. When they got tired, they sat on the kitchen floor. Sakura grabbed 2 cartons of ice cream and 2 spoons and they dug in, laughing and chatting about nonsense. They ate their fill of their dinner. After they finished eating, Seto grew silent and looked around at the mess. Sakura blinked and gently put her hand on his knee. He looked up at her with worried eyes. "Daddy be mad?" he asked in his cute childlike voice and his stuttering. She looked around at the chaos that they had caused and then at the time. It was still early, and knowing Naruto, he would be keeping Sasuke out late. "I'll tell you what, we'll get this place cleaned up, then ourselves, and then we will watch some movies. This will be our little secret. I won't tell if you don't," she whispered for dramatic effect. A breathtaking smile spread across his face and they hopped up and began cleaning the kitchen. They cleaned quickly, but thoroughly, and disposed of any evidence. After giving Seto a quick bath and getting him into his pajamas, and wiping herself down, they sat down on the couch and watched some movies, some of Sakura's favorites when she was growing up. Seto loved them. At the end of the night, Seto was curled up next to her in a peaceful sleep. She gently pulled him into her arms, imitating how Sasuke always carried him when he fell asleep. She carefully carried him upstairs and tucked him in. She turned on the nightlight before exiting the bedroom, closing the door behind her gently. She went back downstairs and curled herself onto the couch. She popped in another movie and got comfy. Soon she felt sleep pulling her in. She smiled softly. Seto liked her more. It was a small accomplishment, but it felt like a big thing to her. Maybe living there wouldn't be so bad after all, she thought. XOX. When Sasuke finally got in, it was 4 in the morning. He slowly and softly entered the house and removed his shoes and coat. He wasn't in the greatest of moods. Naruto had taken him to a bar where they met up with the guys, as Naruto kept repeating over and over again and with more vigor than the last as the night wore on and the drinks piled up. The guys were him, Naruto, Shikamaru, Lee, Neji, and Kiba. The rest of the guys in the Konoha 12 were on missions, thankful because Sasuke wasn't sure if he could take any more of them. The evening started off well enough. After getting literally dragged there, he had actually enjoyed just hanging out with guys his own age. But with each drink, they became louder and more annoying. By the end of the night, everyone was drunk except for him and Neji. The 2 somber teens then decided to split up the drunks and take them home. Sasuke got Naruto and Shikamaru while Neji got Lee and Kiba. Sasuke was thankful for this. He wasn't sure if he could stand hearing much more of how Sakura was youthful. He dropped Shikamaru off first, having a very nice and awkward conversation with his mother while he held a very drunk and slobbering Naruto on his arm and she held a very drunk and nearly passed out Shikamaru on her arm. And once that ordeal was done, he moved on to dropping Naruto off, who he had to fight with in order to get the door unlocked and then blonde into his bed. He then had to undress the blonde because the blonde threw up halfway home and got vomit all over his clothes and he couldn't leave him in it. And since Sasuke was on a roll, he even started soaking the blonde's clothes for him. But he was home now and he wanted nothing more than to go to bed. And to check on Seto. It was the first time he had really left Seto alone and he wanted to know how he fared with the pinkette. He heard noises coming from the living room and followed it. The room was dark except for the TV that was casting a dim light over the entire room. There was some sort of kids movie on the screen and Sasuke stepped forward to turn it off. It was only then, standing in front of her, did he notice that Sakura was sleeping on the couch. He debated about whether or not he wanted to move her up to her room or just leave her there. But he looked uncomfortable. She didn't have a blanket, so her small frame was hunched in a ball, trying to keep herself warm. He felt bad and decided to take her upstairs. He gently wedged his hands under and then, with extra care not to wake her, this being difficult since she was a ninja, lifted her. A grunt slipped past his lips, though she wasn't heavy. In fact, she was very light. But he was so used to carrying a 2-year-old and not a 17-year-old girl. He carried her upstairs and over to her bedroom. Her door was closed, so he had to quietly open it without very much use of his hands, but he succeeded. He made his way over to her new bed and laid her down, stopping for a moment to examine her. She was small but fit. She had really grown over the years, in more ways than one. She was only 5'5" and skinny. Her arms and legs were muscled but in a delicate way. When she was younger, she was flat-chested and wore tight clothes in order to show off what she didn't have. Now she was older, fuller, but her didn't wear the same clothes. Instead, she usually wore clothes that were loose on her body, hiding the curses that she had developed. He hated to admit it, but he found her truly beautiful. Her skin was smooth and creamy, flawless, unlike his that was scarred and calloused. Her hair was soft and smooth, reaching just past her shoulders now, and with the most perfect shade of pink. Her eyes, oh, don't get him started on her eyes. She was beautiful, but not a in-your-face kind of pretty. She had her own natural beauty that no woman could compare to. He wasn't attracted to her, he told himself. He just found her very pleasing to look at instead of all the women he has seen in his life. She doesn't make him want to run away when he sees her. And that's a compliment, a Uchiha compliment. He quickly halted his train of thought because he could feel his face heating up. He shook his head and pulled down the sheets, covering her up. But before he left, he raised an eyebrow and plucked what looked like a noodle out of her hair. He stared at it for a moment before deciding he didn't want to know how it got there and quickly threw it away. He made his way over to Seto's room and checked in. The nightlight allowed him to see what was in the room perfectly. Seto was laying down in bed, fast asleep. Sasuke quietly crept in and kissed him gently on the forehead before leaving. When he got in his room, a wave of exhaustion hit him and he stripped himself of his clothes quickly before climbing into bed. Surprisingly, he fell asleep quickly. Sakura awoke the next morning when something shifted on the bed. She barely felt it in her sleeping state, but as she was a trained shinobi, when the slightest thing shifted on the bed next to her, her body responded. She kept her eyes closed, though she was awake now, listening as little shuffles of clothing and blankets were heard. Something pushed into her stomach. It wasn't terribly heavy or meant to hurt her, but her body automatically responded with a groan. A small giggle met her ears and her eyes fluttered open to be greeted with a pair of gray eyes staring back at her. She blinked twice and tried to comprehend what she was seeing. She briefly looked around at her surroundings. She was in her bedroom, though she had no recollection as to how she had gotten there. Last she remembered, she was on the couch watching TV. But now she found herself comfortably tucked into the sheets of her bed, still wearing the same clothes as last night. She focused on the gray eyes. Under closer examination, she realized it was Seto. He was lying across her stomach, staring up at her cutely. His hair was a mess from sleep, random chucks sticking up that made him resemble Sasuke more than Itachi. His eyes were bright and he had a small smile on his face. She blinked and he tugged at the blankets. She would have been confused if she had not seen him do the same thing to Sasuke. Seto was Sasuke's usual wake-up call, going into his bedroom at an early hour and draping himself across the teen. The teen was a light sleeper, so this would wake him up and then Seto would tug at the blankets and Sasuke would pull the blankets back so that the boy could crawl in with him. They did it every morning. Sakura mimicked Sasuke's usual actions and Seto crawled under the covers with her. He curled himself up at her chest, where he usual was with Sasuke. And as Sasuke always does, Sakura loosely draped her arm over his small form and drifted to sleep once more. She didn't sleep for long when movement awoke her again. He had gotten tired of sleeping and was now rolling around the bed. Sakura glanced at the clock, reading that it was 6:12. She slowly and reluctantly sat up and stretched. "Good morning. Is your daddy up yet?" she asked. Usually Seto always has Sasuke up and moving by at least 5. Seto stopped rolling around and crawled up to her, resting his head on her knees. "Daddy no wake yet." He gave a big crazy smile and Sakura had to smile back. Sakura was soon realizing that Seto had one of those personalities that pulled you in. He was shy to strangers, but once he unleashes one of those smiles of his, he has you locked in his hold. She had wondered what had caused Sasuke to change, and she soon found her answer. Seto was this unbelievable force that drew you in, no matter how much you tried not to. She nodded. You hungry? She asked, and he nodded fiercely. He was hyper in the morning. Well then, let's go get something to eat. The two rolled out of bed. Sakura took the time to grab a robe while Seto bounced anxiously next to her. When she was dressed, the boy surprised her by reaching up to grip her hand. He held it tightly and Sakura smiled, happy to see the sudden change in attitude towards her. Hand in hand, they exited her bedroom. When they got towards the stairs, curiosity got the better of her when she noticed Sasuke's door open. When Sasuke slept, he usually had his door closed, unless Seto had gone in and left it open. However, the teen was almost always awake before she rolled out of bed, so, in truth, she had only seen him sleep once, her first night there. She couldn't resist the urge to peek in. With Seto's hand still in hers, she leaned forward so that she was still by the stairs, but peeking in. She saw Sasuke sleeping all right, his form sprawled out over the top of the bed. His was in his underwear and nothing else, with no blankets to cover his bare skin. Instead, his bed was still almost perfectly made. He was laying on his side, his back to her. His head was on no pillow, only cushioned by his arm. His right foot was hanging off the side of the bed, but Sakura found herself staring instead at his calf. On the back of his right calf was another tattoo. This one was of two black roses, blooming and withering away along the edges of the petals. Seto tugged on her hand gently and she turned to see him spinning on his toes, smiling at her. She offered a smile and then gently tugged his hand back. Together, they headed down the stairs and towards the kitchen. Not long after, Sasuke's eyes slowly fluttered open. Lights were streaming in through the open blinds, right on his face. He had forgotten to close the blinds last night, of course, and now he was paying for it. However, it did strike him as odd that he was being awoken from the sun in the first place. Usually Seto woke him up just as the light was coming over the horizon. He hadn't slept past sunrise in a long time. He rolled over and out of the sunlight, looking around the room. Seto was nowhere to be seen, but his door was open to reveal an empty hallway. He blinked twice before panic filled him. Seto always came to wake him up. Sasuke jumped up with a sudden burst of energy, barely grabbed a pair of sweats before exiting his bedroom and going to Seto's. When he walked through the open door, he scanned the empty room and turned away quickly. He didn't even bother to put the sweats on yet or look at Sakura's bedroom before rushing down the stairs. He stopped at the base of the stairs and listened. There were noises coming from the kitchen, so he silently crept up to the kitchen doorway. He looked in, immediately spotting Sakura and Seto at the counter. Both had their backs to him, working at something. Seto was standing on a chair with a large wooden spoon in his hand, seeming to be stirring something. Sakura stood next to him, watching and helping him stir by gently placing her hands over his. There were items scattered around the counter and the dark-haired teen assumed they were ingredients. The adrenaline drained out of him and he relaxed, knowing Seto was safe. He leaned against the doorway, watching for a long moment before entering the kitchen. He went over to the coffee maker, freeing his hand by setting the sweats down, and started a brew. When he had entered, Sakura had looked over her shoulder and blushed. Seeing him laying in bed in his underwear was one thing, seeing him standing in his underwear in the kitchen was another. He wore them very, very low on his hips. Almost dangerously low. They weren't too baggy, but they weren't skin-tight. She could see almost everything. This pale, exposed, brutally scarred legs with his tattoo, his bare scarred chest, a little more of his tattoo on his hip, but she couldn't make it out still. He wasn't covering much, but for some reason, she found herself wanting to see more. She blushed deeply and tried to push the thoughts away quickly. Good morning, she greeted. She turned her attention back to Seto, forcing herself not to look at Sasuke. The dark-haired teen glanced over at her, noticing that she was bright red and refusing to look at him. Did you sleep well? She asked, still not looking. Sasuke took the time to pull the sweats on while the coffee brewed. He grunted in response, staring blankly at the dark liquid dripping into the pot. He rolled his head, stretching the muscles in his neck. His body felt better than it had in a while. In truth, it was the first time he had really slept well in so long. Maybe almost in years. Sakura's eyes fluttered back to the teen, seeing him now half-dressed. It was sort of a relief, but his chest was still bare and his pants were still low on his hips. Inner Sakura was still freaking out while outer Sakura was trying to distract herself. She blurted the first thing that came to mind. "You have a tattoo." The dark-haired teen blinked and glanced at her questioning. She stared at him blankly, mentally smacking herself. He nodded. Yeah, his only problem was he didn't know which she was referring to. She nodded stupidly. "It's nice," she blurted again. "The roses look really nice." He nodded wordlessly. "Thanks." He paused, and then blurted something out himself. "It's not my only one." She feigned surprise. "Oh? Yeah," he muttered, looking uncomfortable. Sakura noted that he adjusted the waistband of his sweatpants, making sure that the kanji on his hip was covered. She also noted that his right foot twisted and rolled, as if he was trying to hide it from her view, trying to hide it with his long pant leg. She knew about his hip, but she wondered now if he had another on his right foot. She noticed that he didn't really want to talk about them, so she let it drop and instead told him breakfast was almost ready. They sat down and had a peaceful breakfast together. But it was odd for the dark-haired teen. Seto, he noticed, was clinging to Sakura. Since Seto was born, people were always coming in and out of his life. It was one of the reasons he was so shy. He never really got a chance to meet people and get to really know them. So he didn't even try to get to know them because they would just be leaving soon. So when Seto finally realized that Sasuke wasn't going anywhere, unlike everyone else in his life before, including his mother, he clung desperately to the teen. When he got to know him, he clung so that he wouldn't leave. And now, he was clinging to Sakura. This meant, Sasuke concluded, that something must have happened last night while he was away that made Sakura earn Seto's trust. And soon after that, Sasuke realized that the boy really was clinging to her. 2 weeks passed since that morning, it now being the very beginning of November, and still Seto hardly left Sakura's side. It was sort of refreshing, in a way, to not have a 2-year-old permanently attached to his hip. But at the same time, odd. He found himself at a loss of things to do. Usually when he wasn't busy with the numerous things that needed to be done, he was playing and hanging out with Seto. Now he just had free time and he hadn't the slightest idea as to what to do with it. So, he found himself arguing with Inoue a lot. Since Sakura had moved in, the blonde was constantly coming over. But it wasn't like she was coming over just to hang out, she was making herself completely at home. Since Sasuke had left, Ino's childish crush had faded. She no longer lusted after him, something he was extremely grateful for since she was always over now. Instead, she had figured out that it was fun to annoy him. She went out of her way to find ways to annoy him, and he, for the sake of having something to do instead of sitting and staring at a wall, fought back against her little attacks. It was all in fun, no real harm being done to either party. It was just a playful love-hate thing between sort of friends. The downside of Ino coming over a lot, her influence in the house. She was always into something, whether it being looking through old shelves and boxes in the house, eating a good-sized hole in the fridge, or just trying to get under Sasuke's skin. She was making things a lot crazier in the house. And since she was best friends with Sakura and Seto was clinging to the pinkette, he was substantially in her presence. Which meant some of her antics were beginning to rub off on him. Something Sasuke wasn't too pleased about. Sasuke was currently sitting in the living room, a book in hand. All of his daily chores were done and he had nothing to do except entertain himself. He had trained for a few hours in the backyard, showered and was now relaxing, or at least trying to. Ino, returning from the bathroom, poked her head into the living room quickly. "Man whore," she called. Sasuke, not looking away from his book, drawled. "Care to explain why exactly I'm a man whore?" She snickered and leaned against the doorframe. "'Cause I talked to Hinata and Naruto today." "And what of connection?" Sasuke asked, flipping the page. She smiled and stepped into the living room. She made her way over to the ottoman in front of him. The ottoman was large, so that Seto could lay there comfortably and Sakura could do the same if she curled herself. She sat on the plush furniture and gently put her hand over the top of the book he was reading and pushed down, making him lower it and look at her. She smiled mischievously. "Well, we were talking about you, of course." He took a bored deep breath. "Is that so?" he replied sarcastically. She nodded, ignoring the sarcasm and simply going with it. Well, we were expressing our amazement that you of all people would be the first to have a child. Then your darling blonde friend mentioned something about how Sito's mother wasn't even very close to you. What was it that he had said? Something about, love isn't always in the same company as lust, wasn't that along the lines of what you had said? Sasuke took a deep, calming breath. He could really his irritation rising. What are you trying to say, freak? She narrowed her eyes briefly at the name but her expression didn't falter for long. Moments later, she was smirking mischievously again. Nothing, of course, but I guess it's safe to assume that you are, well for lack of a better term, a man whore. Sasuke leaned forward, his face blank. You don't know anything. Now why don't you go run along and go terrorize small children or something? Or better yet, go run around the block or something. I know you like those cheesecakes and all, but seriously, a run would help burn off all those extra calories. Ino narrowed her eyes dangerously while Sasuke just smirked. But before she could retort, Sakura poked her head in as well. You two aren't fighting again, are you? Of course not, right Ino? We were just discussing cheesecakes, Sasuke said with a roguish smirk. Sakura wasn't fooled and Ino's glare deepened. Sasuke chuckled and lifted his book back up. Sakura and Seto fully entered the room then. Sakura tugged on Ino's arm, urging the blonde to go into the kitchen with her. She knew that the two had been bickering again and Ino had an insulted look on her face while Sasuke held a victorious expression on his. She knew it was best to separate them before one said something they would regret later. Sasuke looked over when Seto tugged on his pant leg. The young boy smiled and Sasuke couldn't help but return the gesture. While Sakura tried to move Ino, Seto climbed onto the couch next to his father and hugged him. Both girls stopped and watched as Sasuke put down the book and hugged him back, pulling him onto his lap and kissing his head. I love you, Daddy, Seto murmured into the teen's chest. Sasuke's eyes softened. I love you too, Bubby. Ino, this being the first time she had really seen Sasuke really express his emotions, stopped and watched. Even she couldn't deny the change the young teen had undergone while he was away. She stopped her struggles and silently decided to give him a pass this time, but only because she couldn't ruin the moment. Sakura gently tugged on Ino's sleeve and the blonde nodded. Wordlessly, they went to the kitchen. But when Seto noticed that Sakura was gone, he squirmed out of Sasuke's grip. Said teen smiled and gave him another kiss before gently patting his back and telling him to run off and behave. The boy joined the girls. The girls had entered the kitchen and went to the island. Ino sat down and grabbed an apple out of the fruit bowl and took a bite, chewing on it thoughtfully. She swallowed. He's changed. Sakura glanced at her and nodded, plucking single grapes out of the bundle and chewing on them. Yeah, she stated simply. He loves the kid to death, the blonde said, staring at the countertop before looking up at the pinkette. I wonder who his mother is. Sakura shrugged. In truth, she sort of wondered too. She knew that Seto wasn't Sasuke's kid, but it still made her wonder who this woman was. What kind of woman was she to capture the attention of an Uchiha boy? And how did Seto wind up in Sasuke's care? Why wasn't she in the picture? Was she even alive, or did she not want him? And if so, what kind of mother would abandon her child? I don't know. Sakura shrugged. Ino eyed her nonchalant attitude. Don't tell me you don't care? The pinkette blinked in surprise and stopped chewing. After a moment, she swallowed. What? The blonde studied her. You used to be in love with Sasuke, like madly in love. And going by Sito's age, this woman was in his life not long after he left you. How can you be so relaxed about this? I know you well enough to know that you should be at least care about her and who she is. Why don't you? Are you jealous at all? She hadn't thought about it. She knew the truth, so it didn't occur to her to be jealous. She wasn't jealous of her because that woman wasn't with Sasuke, she was with Itachi. But now that she thought about it, who said that Sasuke hadn't been with anyone while he was away? She didn't know. Anything could have happened. He was a different person now. And for the first time she felt the sting of jealous in her heart. It hurt to think that he had been with someone. After she had confessed her love for him to go off and be with someone else. It hurt to think about. She could almost picture some strange woman kissing him, a woman the complete opposite of her. Sakura quickly shook her head, telling herself she was being irrational. What does she care if he had a relationship with another woman? She was over him now. So over him, but it's sort of pathetic when you can't even lie well to yourself. Sakura sighed. I just try not to think about it, she finally said to her friend. Ino eyed her, sensing that the discussion was over. Just then, Seto entered the kitchen and gripped Sakura's hand. He gave a tug. Chocolate? He asked, though he mispronounced it. She smiled at the boy. I have a nice chocolate mousse recipe I have been wanting to try out. How's that sound? Want to help me make it? He nodded excitedly and the two set out to prepare it. It all went well enough until they were going to mix in the yolks. Sakura had bumped into an extra spoon and it clattered to the ground. In the same moment, Ino stepped forward to grab a glass out of the cupboard. She had moved the mixing bowl over so that she could get in, but when she moved it, half of it was now hanging over the side. She hadn't thought much of it because she was going to move it back when she was done. Sakura bent down while Ino was moving the bowl to grab the spoon. When she was coming back up, she hit the bowl and it flipped onto her head. The entire contents of bowl dripped all over her while the bowl fell to the ground, now empty, with a loud bang. Everything froze. Ino covered her open mouth with her hands while Sakura sat frozen with her eyes closed. After a moment, Ino spoke. I'm sorry. Was that my fault? Yeah, pig, that was your fault. Ino laughed nervously. Sakura stood up and wiped her hand across her face, getting the mix away from her eyes. She opened them and glanced down at her body, now covered in the dark mixture. She sighed. I'm going to go take a shower. Ino nodded while Seto giggled. I'm going to just clean up this mess here, Ino suggested and Sakura nodded. Sakura slowly and stiffly made her way out of the kitchen. Sasuke, who had working to block out the noise from the kitchen, glanced up from his book very briefly. But just as quickly, he did a double take when he saw Sakura covered in something brown and messy. He gave her a questioning stare and she, very bluntly answered his silent question. We had an accident. I'm going to go shower. And with that, she stiffly turned and headed up the stairs. She went straight to the bathroom and removed her shirt. She turned on the cold water and grabbed some soap and scrubbed the article furiously, trying to clean it before the mess dried in and left a stain. When she was satisfied, she lifted it out of the sink and examined it. But when she did so, it slipped from her fingers and messily fell to the ground. Instead of mopping up her mess of water that she left on the ground, Sakura laid her shirt over the sink, where it dripped and created a bigger mess. But in that moment, she could care less. All she wanted to do was get into the shower and clean the chocolate out of her hair. She stripped herself of her clothes and turned the water on before stepping in. Downstairs, Ino was wiping up the last of the mess when Seto tugged on her sleeve. He had chocolate smeared all over his hands and face, since she had given him a chocolate bar to make him happy after she ruined the recipe. She blinked and then smiled at how cute he looked. Why don't you go and clean yourself up? I'll be right behind you to help you, she told him with a smile and he nodded before scurrying off. Sasuke glanced up in time to watch him pass. He didn't think much of it. But instead of going to the downstairs bathroom or even Sasuke's private bathroom, Seto went to the one that Sakura was in. While she lathered up her hair for the second time, the door opened noisily. Sakura looked over, though the shower curtain was between them. She could make out a small silhouette on the other side and she knew it was Seto. And just as he hit the huge puddle of water Sakura had left, Sakura remembered its presence. She opened her mouth to warn him but it never made it out. Instead, she heard the sound of something sliding and then watched in silent horror as his little form fell. He came crashing backwards and he gripped the shower curtain to try and steady himself. However, it wasn't enough and he yanked the curtain right off the support rail. The next thing Sakura knew, there was a little 2-year-old, wrapped in a shower curtain, tumbling into the shower with her. He hit her legs while she tried to catch him but failed to when her own feet slipped out from underneath her. She screamed as she fell. Downstairs, Sasuke calmly turned the page when he heard a scream. A moment's shock filled him and he didn't move until he saw Ino rush out of the kitchen. She looked at him and the dark-haired teen remembered that Seto had disappeared moments before. What was that? Was that Sakura? The blonde asked him. Sasuke jumped up and rushed to the hallway. But before he could answer her question where Seto had gone, the blonde gripped his arm and tugged. She dragged him roughly up the stairs, pulling and tugging the entire time with such force that the teen wondered dimly if his arm was going to be tugged off. But before the blonde could amputate him, he found himself standing in front of the open bathroom door. One moment he was behind the dumb blonde, the next, he was being pushed into the bathroom roughly. Steam was everywhere, making the air hot and sticky. It obscured his vision for a moment, and he felt disorientated. He forced himself to focus. The water was running behind him and he turned, nearly slipping on a big puddle on the ground. Seto was staring up at him with a disoriented look that matched his father's. He was wrapped in the showered curtain, his face and exposed clothes getting soaked by the water's spray. Underneath him was Sakura. She was holding him in her arms, her own face equally bewildered. She was naked, but since the shower curtain and Seto were currently on top of her, she was covered. Even so, Sasuke felt his face heat up. Sakura looked up at the teen, a frantic look coming over her. I think he has slipped on the pee puddle and I don't know. He just came crashing in the shower with me, she stuttered, so frazzled by everything that she couldn't think straight. Sasuke let the words sink in before he grabbed 2 towels from the small closet by the door. He handed one to Sakura, and she stared at him in confusion for a moment. He ignored the stare and detangled Seto from the shower curtain. When the child was free, he lifted the shower curtain off of the fallen teen and discarded it onto the ground. With Seto being held by one arm, he wrapped the child up with the towel. Is he okay? Sakura stuttered. She sat up awkwardly, completely forgetting that she was naked and flashing her naked body to the other teen. He blushed again and averted his eyes. Maybe you should. He trailed off. I tried to grab him when I fell. Did he get hurt? She asked, leaning forward. Sasuke couldn't resist, his eyes being drawn to her exposed flesh. But he caught himself quickly. He averted his eyes again. He stared longingly at the hallway, looking for an escape. He glanced back at her again, and then turned away quickly. He noticed Ino standing in the doorway. Her face was bright red, but he could see from her expression that it wasn't from embarrassment. She was trying really hard to hold in her laughs. Yeah, I'm going to go, he muttered and quickly pushed past Ino and sped into Seto's room. He closed the door after him. Sakura blinked in confusion. What? Where did he go? I don't understand. Ino stepped into bathroom and noted her friend's position. She was still in the bathtub. Her one leg was hanging over the side while the other was folded into the bathtub, her most intimate parts open for display. The towel sat forgotten across her stomach while her s were exposed. Her expression was that of confusion. Ino bent down and tugged at the towel to try and cover her. Sakura stared down at the towel for a moment, processing what just happened. Suddenly she blushed deeply, much brighter than a tomato, and putting her pink hair to shame, and covered herself. She hugged the towel to her body. Oh, no, 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 she repeated. Ino held back a laugh. Thankfully Sakura was too caught up in her moment to notice. She looked at her friend pleadingly. You don't think Sasuke saw anything, do you? Ino bit her lip. Do you want the truth? Sakura considered this for a moment. Yeah. Ino stared at her for a moment, her face completely serious. I think the only way he could have seen more is if you rubbed yourself all over him, she stated calmly, nodding matter-of-factly. Sakura glared at her friend. I don't need your joking right now. Sasuke just saw me naked. Ino snorted and then nodded. Yeah, I'm sorry. You're right, that was inappropriate of me. But in all seriousness, he saw everything. He was as red as a tomato. Sakura groaned and slumped down into the tub. Great. Just as things were starting to get better, Sasuke just had to see me naked. Ino snorted and the pinkette glared. Ino, this isn't funny. I'm sorry.
That's all for now. If you enjoy this video, then please like, share and do comments.